Chapter 816. Perhaps it was because those who challenged higher levels would not be eliminated. So after Passerby B was defeated, Passerby S still chose to challenge Gahan. The result was naturally tragic. Passerby A was no match for Juzi at all. She lasted 1 minute longer than Lady Ching Hong and lost. Next was London College's Beckham and Bear Grylls. Passerby A and B had fully demonstrated Gahan's strength, so they did not choose to challenge Gahan. Instead, they chose to challenge Berlin College's Munich, who was sitting on the 3rd floor. This was because this was the only opponent they could defeat. Other than Munich, the opponents on the 3rd level and above were all famed sword-level sword-bearers. This was a challenge that Beckham and Bear Grylls, who were treasured sword-level sword-bearers, could not challenge. However, they never expected Munich to be so strong. These two people challenged Munich one after another, and both failed. Munich also firmly defended their position. Munich's blade master was a martial arts blade master with strong physical strength. She charged forward like a chariot and forcibly defeated Beckham and Bear Grylls. However, when faced with Abdullah's challenge, Munich finally lost. Abdullah's blade master was actually a very rare mind control skill. Blade masters with strong physical bodies would more or less have some mental weakness. Once their minds were controlled by the opposing blade master, defeat was inevitable. As a result, Abdullah kicked Munich out of the 3rd level, and he took a step forward and was now in 3rd place. After Abdullah, it was the Saintess Ashima's turn. She was also the 2nd ace contestant of the Elite 8 Academies tournament, a famed swordsman. At this time, the contestants sitting on the first 3 floors were all famed swordsmen, except for Abdullah. Ashima naturally would not challenge Abdullah from her own college, so the next battle would definitely be a battle between famed swordsmen. Thinking of this, all the spectators began to get excited. In the past 8 Academies tournament, it was rare to see a battle between famed swordsmen. This was because there was usually only one famous sword-bearer in the 8 Academies tournament. Sometimes, there were even only sword-bearers in the tournament. But when there were 2 sword-bearers in the 8 Academies tournament, these 2 sword-bearers would have a tacit understanding to eliminate the sword-bearers from the other cities' academies first. Finally, they would compete with each other in the finals. It was not like today, where they could see a battle between famed swordsmen in just the 2nd round. No one could clearly see Ashima's expression under the veil, but it was obvious that she was hesitating. Ashima could challenge Gahan, Leslie Dracula, Haley Chong Raw, Ladia, and Lunyan Ling was naturally the first to be ruled out, as Ashima did not have any intention of looking for trouble. 2 months ago, Ashima had already fought with Gahan. At that time, both of them were treasured swordsmen, and it ended with Gahan's victory. However, at this time, both of them had advanced to famed swordsmen, and no one knew who would win and who would lose, or who would be stronger. However, Ashima's gaze had never been on Gahan. Her gaze had always been hesitant on Ladia and Haley Chong Ruah. This was because these two seemed to be the weakest of all the opponents. I want to challenge London's contestant, Haley Chong Ruah. Ashima finally made her decision. She chose to challenge London's Haley Chong Ruah. This was the most standard choice. Ladia was somewhat famous, but Haley Chong Ruah did not have any fame before the tournament. It was as if this person had appeared out of thin air. There were 2 reasons for this result. The first was that Haley Chong Ruah deliberately hid himself, and the second was that Haley Chong Ruah was just lucky. He happened to be born with a high level of swordsmanship, and he also met a famed sword mistress who could synchronize with him. No matter which reason it was, it showed that Haley Chong Ruah was not confident in himself, and this was the kind of person Ashima hated. Sigh. Haley Chong Ruah smiled bitterly and sighed. He supported his small body and stood up. At this time, a small breeze blew past, causing Haley Chong Ruah's robe to flutter continuously. At the same time, it also set off Haley Chong Ruah's body. Under the robe, Haley Chong Ruah's body was much thinner, like a malnourished child. Greetings, noble lady. On the arena, Haley Chong Ruah did not forget the etiquette that a British gentleman should have. He took off his hat and placed it in front of his chest. He bowed slightly to Ashima and greeted her. Under the robe, Ashima's response was very direct. She pulled out a long sword engraved with complex patterns from the scabbard on her back and pointed the tip of the sword at Haley Chong Rua's chest. I am a famed sword mistress, Ashima Muhammad. I use the sword of the prophet, a famed sword mistress of the famed sword mistress level. After this battle with you, all gratitude and resentment will be settled. With our lives, we will shine on the prosperity of mankind and not let down the future generations. As the saintess of the Green Sect, if Ashima wanted to become a famed sword mistress level sword mistress, she could only synchronize with a set of swords of faith that represented the divine power of Allah. I don't know if everyone still remembers this set of sword mistress level, but Gohan once had a hard battle with the sword of the future generation. At that time, Gohan faced the Heaven Reliance 1 month later, which was the Heaven Reliance after the invasion of Yuzhong City. Now that he thought about it, the sword essence in Gohan's body a month later was about 20,000 quarks. At that time, Gohan only had about 6,000 quarks. It was an extremely difficult battle, and even the Heaven Reliance was stunned. Now that Ashima had become a famed sword mistress level, the sword of the prophet that she used was naturally changed. This was a sword mistress that was even more terrifying than the sword of the future generation. I am a famed sword mistress level Harry Chong Rua. The sword mistress I use is the famed sword mistress level Gryffindor sword. This was the first time Haley Chong Rua revealed his famed sword mistress level. His famed sword mistress level was actually the demonic sword mistress Gryffindor sword that rarely appeared. Gryffindor sword was the same as the heavenly sword. They were both sword mistresses that would hibernate for hundreds of years and hated to appear. It had been 700 years since Gryffindor sword had first appeared, and in these 700 years, Gryffindor sword had only been synchronized 3 times. This was the 4th time Gryffindor sword had appeared. Gryffindor sword was not ranked very high among the famed sword mistresses, being in the 20s. However, her battle style was very unique and was completely different from most sword mistresses. As for how unique it would be known from the next battle. Is it another boring Great 8 Academies assembly? Gryffindor sword blurted out this sentence the moment she was liberated, and it made the audience feel extremely awkward. After the awkwardness, people started to get curious. Had Gryffindor sword participated in the Great 8 Academies assembly before? Hence, people started to search for information, and they were shocked to find that Gryffindor sword had participated in the Great 8 Academies assembly 3 times before. Gryffindor sword had only appeared 3 times before, which meant that she had participated in the Great 8 Academies assembly every time she appeared. If Gryffindor sword wanted to participate in the Great 8 Academies assembly, she had to let her swordsman become a famed swordsman within a year. How many swordsmen could there be in the world? It was almost impossible to encounter such a situation by natural luck. This meant that this was the result of Gryffindor sword's deliberate selection. Thinking of this, the audience seemed to understand why Gryffindor sword had appeared so few times. When she chose her swordsman, she would only choose those geniuses who had 10,000 quarks of sword elements within a year. That was why she had appeared so few times. The prophet will foretell your death. At the same time, the prophet's sword had also completed its liberation. It turned into a young girl in a green robe with a green scarf wrapped around her head. The young girl's expression was sacred and solemn, just like a noble deity from heaven. When a young girl appeared, Abdullah, who was also a swordsman of the Jerusalem Academy, suddenly knelt down and buried his head deep into the ground. He did not dare to take another look at the battlefield. To be precise, he did not dare to look at the young girl called the prophet. This was the common problem of every swordsman of Jerusalem. They were extremely ignorant of their deity. Even in the midst of a battle, they would deliberately stop to pray. Some would even give up the battle because of some taboo. There were many such examples. Every once in a while, there would be news like this. A swordsman of Jerusalem was fighting a tough battle. However, at a certain point in time, the swordsman who was clearly still fighting would suddenly kneel down and pray in the direction of Mecca. Then, there would be no then. There were many such stories. This was also the reason why the Jerusalem Bay City was hated by the other Bay cities. It was because they placed their deity above the swordsman. This was something that the other swordsmen could not accept. A city like Jerusalem should not exist. Seeing this scene, Gohan secretly clenched his fists. He saw that the noble swordsman was actually kneeling and praying to some inexplicable deity. This made Gohan sink into a kind of rage. Although he did not say anything on the surface, his face was livid. However, Gohan secretly told himself that once he had the power to change the entire human world, a base city like Jerusalem would have to change and return to the universal values of all swordsmen. Chapter 817. This time, let me, Gryffindor, take the 4th gold medal of the Great 8 Academies Tournament. 10,000 bullets. Lady Gryffindor roared, and 10 fireballs suddenly condensed in the air around the Gryffindor's sword in her hand. The moment these fireballs condensed, they all shot out, and their target was the Prophet's sword opposite her. The power of these 10 fireballs should not be underestimated. Anyone who knew Gryffindor's sword would know. Gryffindor's fighting style was very simple and fast. 10 huge fireballs flew over, and normally, Yuan-Ko of the same level would be half crippled. As long as 10 more were added, the battle would basically be over. This was the power of Gryffindor as a diabolical sword mistress. Actually, rather than calling her a diabolical sword mistress, it would be more appropriate to call her a magical sword mistress. This was because Gryffindor's basic skill was called Gryffindor's Curse. This Gryffindor's Curse was not like most of the basic skills of sword mistresses, which only had one skill effect. The Gryffindor's Curse was actually a skill that combined many curses. To make a simple analogy, the basic skill of an ordinary sword mistress was like a seed file. However, the Gryffindor's Curse was a compressed file that compressed dozens of seed files into a compressed package. Although it seemed that both of them only occupied one icon. In fact, there were dozens of icons in the Gryffindor's Curse. 10,000 bullets was only one of the curses in the Gryffindor's Curse compressed file. Apart from that, the Gryffindor's Curse had many other curses that could achieve different effects. This was equivalent to Gryffindor's sword having dozens of skills compared to those ordinary sword mistresses that only had 4 skills. Hence, Gryffindor's sword had a nickname, Duobao Sword Mistress. It did not mean that Gryffindor's sword had many treasures, but that she had many different skills. Everything is within the Lord's expectations. The moment the fireball was launched, the Prophet casually took a step to the left, and then his body stopped moving. At the same time, the 10 fireballs had directly hit the Prophet's body. Just when everyone thought that the Prophet's body would explode, the fireballs flew straight past it, as if the Prophet's body did not exist. What exactly happened? Why did the fireball just fly over? The audience was surprised and had no idea what had just happened. Only master swordsmen like Gohan and Liu Ling could see that the Prophet was actually stuck between the gaps of the fireballs. The fireballs actually did not hit the Prophet even once. This was just like a famous variety show from before the apocalypse called Here Comes the Wall. The contestants had to strike a specific pose and pass through a specially shaped hole in the middle of the wall. Otherwise, they would be dragged into the water by the wall. The reason why the Prophet had to dodge was because the fireball was less than 10 centimeters away from the Prophet's body. That was why the Prophet's body wasn't hurt at all. This is the strength of the Prophet Goddess. The clairaudient cameraman sighed in admiration before explaining to the people around him. As the name suggests, the Prophet Goddess has the ability to foresee things. It was said that depending on the level of the wielder, they would be able to predict what would happen in the next 10 seconds to an hour. Just now, the Prophet Goddess must have predicted the trajectory of the 10 fireballs. Hence, she only took one step and dodged all the fireballs. Damn it! Gryffindor clenched his teeth and glared at the Prophet opposite him. Earth spikes. Gryffindor only said 2 words, and the Prophet Goddess suddenly moved a few steps back. Then, more than 10 earth spikes protruded from the ground. If the Prophet Goddess had retreated a few tenths of a second later, she would have been pierced by these earth spikes. Amazing! She even predicted this. The audience did not understand, but the swordsman on the throne did. Just now, When Gryffindor had only used half of his skills and used his mental strength to lock onto the position of the control skill demonstration, the Prophet Goddess had already successfully predicted where Gryffindor's skills would be released. Seeing that his 2 waves of skills had failed, Gryffindor could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Don't think that he had only used 2 spells just now. In fact, these 2 spells were extremely powerful and had already consumed a lot of sword essence in Gryffindor's body. Don't think that she had only used 2 spells just now. In fact, the 2 spells were extremely powerful and had already consumed a lot of sword essence in Gryffindor's body. In contrast, the Prophet Goddess had only moved a few steps. She had only consumed a little bit of energy. From this moment on, the Prophet Goddess already had the upper hand. Let's see how you're going to dodge this. 10,000 bullets at once. The great god prophesied that pure water can erase dirty fire. Gryffindor waved his hand, and 100 fireballs appeared beside her in an instant. Then, these fireballs were all triggered in an instant, forming a dense net of bullets. Gryffindor's idea was simple. Can't you dodge? Then I'll weave a net for you that you can't dodge. However, someone really wanted to complain. You're already calling it 10,000 bullets at once, but why are there only 100 fireballs? Where's the promised 10,000 bullets? Objectively speaking, this was indeed a good idea. The Prophet Goddess's movement technique was not that great. She could not rely on her own movement speed to dodge the area covered by the bullets. Hence, the Prophet Goddess began to recite her god's prophecy at the same time that Gryffindor used 10,000 bullets at once. When Gryffindor's bullet fire net shot out, a clear stream of water flowed down from the Prophet Goddess's head and enveloped her entire body. Sizzle. It sounded like a red-hot piece of iron coming into contact with water, and then a burst of smoke came out. The fireballs that hit the Prophet Goddess's body were immediately extinguished by the water that poured down. Apart from making the Prophet Goddess's body wet, the true 10,000 bullets had no other effect. Damn it! This was the second time that Gryffindor had said the word damn it today. This meant that Gryffindor's heart had already fallen into extreme anxiety. No matter what kind of attack she launched, it was a terrible feeling to be predicted by the opponent. Come on, take another attack from me, 10,000 bullets. Gryffindor shouted indignantly. Then, she waved the Gryffindor sword in her hand, and 100 fireballs appeared around her again. Looking at it from afar, it gave off a scorching feeling. It would definitely not end well to be hit by such a fireball. The great god's prophecy. Pure water can wipe out dirty fire. At the same time, the water that had enveloped her appeared above the Prophet Goddess's head again. Ha ha ha, you've been tricked. Gryffindor laughed happily. She snapped her fingers, and the 100 fireballs around her disappeared in an instant. These are just some simple illusions. What foretelling the future? It's just **T. God has seen through everything about you, the Prophet Goddess said with her head lowered. The water around her also disappeared in an instant. It turned out that it was just a simple illusion. Gryffindor's face instantly turned red. The Prophet Goddess's words just now were like the most vicious mockery that kept ringing in her ears. She felt like she was a monkey wearing a crown and had become the target to be toyed with. Heart of Gryffindor. Gryffindor raised the sword in her hand, and a wisp of smoke floated out of the Gryffindor sword. In the blink of an eye, the smoke transformed into a majestic golden-haired lion. Its sharp eyes stared at its opponent as if it was ready to launch a fatal blow at any moment. That was the ultimate skill of the Gryffindor sword. It could summon the soul of the golden sword lion contained in the Gryffindor sword and let the golden sword lion help it in battle. It was said that when the original owner of the Gryffindor sword was forging the Gryffindor sword, he killed a golden sword lion and then integrated the soul of the golden sword lion into it. Hence, the Gryffindor sword had the power to summon the golden sword lion. This could be seen from Yuan Ko, because there was indeed a magical beast called the Golden Sword Lion in the camp of the Western Magical Beasts, and this magical beast was at the Nether level, Yuan Ko. As a Nether level Yuan Ko, the Golden Sword Lion naturally had its own unique characteristics, which were its attack speed and movement speed. The speed of the Golden Sword Lion was said to be comparable to the speed of a Celestial Sword or Universe level Yuan Ko. Using such speed to deal with a famous sword-level swordmistress was naturally successful. Even if she could predict the next attack of the Golden Sword Lion, there was no way she could dodge it. That was Gryffindor's plan. Almighty prophecy, my left hand is enough to resist the attack of the Golden Sword Lion. Suddenly, the prophet's sword said. Then, the Golden Sword Lion that was in an attacking state attacked at the same time. The prophet did not dodge, and allowed the teeth of the Golden Sword Lion to land on her left wrist. Crack! With a loud sound, the Golden Sword Lion took a few steps back in pain. There were few teeth marks on the prophet's diamond-like arm. On the other hand, one of the sharp teeth of the Golden Sword Lion was broken. My left calf is enough to resist the attack of the Golden Sword Lion. It was another familiar scene. The prophet once again predicted the movement of the Golden Sword Lion before it attacked. She turned her left calf into diamond and broke the second sharp tooth of the Golden Sword Lion. Oh! The Golden Sword Lion let out a sorrowful cry. Then, its entire body turned back into green smoke and returned to Gryffindor's sword. As a nether-level Yuan-Ko that was one level higher than the famous sword level, it naturally could not be used by a famous sword-level swordmistress. The weakness of the Golden Sword Lion was its teeth. These two teeth were not its real teeth, but were formed by borrowing the power of the sword essence. Every time it attacked, it would consume the sword essence of its teeth. Once the sword essence that formed the two teeth disappeared, the Golden Sword Lion would disappear too. Chapter 8:18. Lady Gryffindor's forehead was already covered in sweat. Summoning the Golden Sword Lion consumed a lot of her energy. It was equivalent to using half of the sword essence in her body on the Golden Sword Lion. However, the Golden Sword Lion died in less than 10 seconds. This undoubtedly dealt a huge blow to Gryffindor. The only thing that comforted Gryffindor was that the prophet's forehead was also covered in sweat. This meant that the prophet had also consumed a lot of sword essence in order to use the clairvoyance to protect her body. As one of the famous sword mistresses, the prophet's sword skills had long been known to the world. The prophet's sword's basic skill was prophecy, which could make her predictions come true 100% of the time. For example, if the prophet's sword predicted that it would rain, it would immediately rain instead of snow. That was why the prophet's sword could predict that there would be a stream of water protecting her and that her body would turn into a hard diamond. However, such a prophecy was not unlimited. According to the actual situation, different prophecies required different sword essence of the quark. For example, predicting a stream of water to protect herself was a prophecy that consumed less energy. However, predicting that her body would turn into a diamond was a prophecy that consumed medium energy. In order to resist the pressure brought by the Golden Sword Lion, the prophet's sword also consumed a lot of energy. However, relatively speaking, the prophet's sword's energy consumption was far less than Gryffindor's. After Lin Lee's ultimate move failed, Gryffindor had already lost. Next, the prophet's sword, who was passively defending, changed her tactics and took the initiative to attack. This put Gryffindor in a very passive position. Gryffindor's position was as a mage, and all the players were very clear about what would happen to a mage once he was close to them. Gryffindor's only chance to win was to think of a way to stop the prophet's sword from getting close to him. However, this was already impossible. All of Gryffindor's spells were perfectly predicted and avoided by the prophet's sword goddess. In the end, it was inevitable that the prophet's sword goddess would get close to him. Although the prophet's sword goddess's swordsmanship was also bad, Gryffindor's swordsmanship was worse. Moreover, the prophet's sword goddess could also predict the opponent's next attack perfectly and avoid it. In the end, the prophet's sword goddess broke Gryffindor's personal shield with one strike. The match was declared over, and Ashima won. Gryffindor walked back to Harry Chong-Rua's side dejectedly. Then, he could not help but start crying uncontrollably. This was probably the worst defeat she had ever suffered in her career as a sword mistress. She, who had won the Great 8 Academies tournament 3 times in the past, was actually defeated in the second round. This really left her speechless. What made Gryffindor even more ashamed was that she had promised Harry Chong-Rua that she could easily get second place the night before. It's all right, Anyway, we can't get first or second place. As long as we're not the last place, it's fine. Harry Chong Rua's consolation made Gryffindor cry even harder. Ashima wins. Harry Chong Rua eliminated. The host's voice rang out, and Beckham, the City of London's swordsman, immediately stood up and gestured to the host. I'm willing to replace Harry Chong Rua. Approved. Beckham eliminated. After the host finished speaking, Beckham shook his head suavely and made a shooting motion. He then left the martial arts field, leaving his position for Harry Chong Rua. As a result, Ashima sat on the second floor, while Harry Chong Rua sat on the fourth floor. I want to challenge the contestant from the Jerusalem Academy, Abdullah of Long. After Ashima won, Xiaobai immediately announced his opponent. It was Abdullah, who had defeated his friend from Munich and was sitting on the third floor. Very soon, Abdullah was defeated, and he set off on his way home with Beckham. The reason for Abdullah's defeat was very simple. His opponent, Xiaobai, was a swordsman of the famed sword level. Similarly, he won by suppressing his opponent. At this time, the number of contestants who had been eliminated in the second round had already reached 4. There were still 6 battles left. If 4 more contestants could not be eliminated in these 6 battles, then an intra-floor duel would be held. The contestant from a 4th floor would challenge each other on the same floor until 8 contestants were eliminated. At this time, the person who chose his opponent was Andreevich, who was highly favored before the competition and was unanimously recognized as a strong candidate for the championship. The little boy, Andreevich, was a little shy, but he said in a mellow tone, I want to challenge the contestant from the Jerusalem Academy, Miss Ashima. With regards to Andreevich's choice, the other contestants did not find it strange at all, because in the world, the base city that was most displeased with Jerusalem was Moscow. The fearless fighting people had always been very dissatisfied with this kind of city that relied on religion to control people's hearts. In the previous Octahouses tournament, the swordsmen of the Moscow Academy would seize the opportunity to have an exciting battle with the swordsmen of Jerusalem. Therefore, it wasn't strange for Andreevich to choose Ashima as his opponent. It seems that this will be a fierce battle. The cameraman with Clairaudient could not help but sigh when he saw the 2 people walking onto the arena. Andreevich was already a famous, powerful swordsman, and Ashima's battle just now also amazed all the spectators. The ability to foresee and predict everything caused everyone to tremble uncontrollably. This kind of battle that was completely controlled by someone else was really terrible. No one would want to fight with such an enemy who could predict everything. So in the eyes of the cameraman with Clairaudient and most of the audience, this battle must be as fierce as the battle between Ashima and Harry Chong Rua. Hey, how about we make a bet? Leslie Dracula suddenly turned her head and said to Gahan behind her, I bet that Andreevich can defeat this annoying Jerusalemite in 5 minutes. How about it? Bet with me. What's the bet? Gohan asked expressionlessly. If I win, you'll challenge me later. How about it? Leslie Dracula said with a smile, but her bet was a bit strange. She actually took the initiative to ask Gohan to challenge her. No one knew what she was thinking. Okay, Gohan nodded, but I want to bet that Andreevich can finish the battle in 2 minutes. Are you willing to bet with me? What? Finish the battle in 2 minutes? Are you kidding me? Although Leslie Dracula had no doubt that Andreevich would win, she also deeply understood Ashima's fighting strength. She did not believe that the whole battle would last for 2 minutes. This Yuzhong person must be crazy. I'll bet with you. Leslie Dracula reached out her hand and put it in front of Gahan, indicating that she wanted to sign the bet by shaking hands with Gahan. Gahan did not answer with his mouth. Instead, he directly held Leslie Dracula's fair and delicate hand, and the bet was officially established. However, Gahan did not seem to notice that there was a pair of eyes secretly watching everything on the 3rd floor. His frosty face became even colder. This pervert, Liuyan Ling muttered softly. It seemed that the distance between her and Gahan was getting further and further apart. I lost. Leslie Dracula hung her head dejectedly. In less than 2 minutes, the all-seeing sword's protective shield had already exploded, leaving behind Ashima, whose expression could not be seen clearly, and Andreevich, who was holding the Vasilyevic with an honest smile. This was a battlefield filled with lightning, and the duration of the battle was also like lightning. The entire process of the battle went like this. After the announcement of the start of the battle, Andreevich held the Vasilyevic sword in his hand and dashed towards the prophet goddess like a bolt of lightning. And the prophet goddess, who had calmly dealt with all the enemy's attacks, seemed to have disappeared. The prophet began to panic. It seemed that not only could she not predict her opponent's next move, but she also could not use her prophecy ability. She just kept trying to escape from Andreevich's attack range. But that was impossible. Andreevich's movement speed was far higher than the prophet's. He was like a piece of dogskin plaster that could not be shaken off, clinging to the prophet tightly. On the other hand, the goddess of the prophet was brutally slashed by Andreevich in the most violent manner for an entire minute. Finally, the goddess of the prophet's protective shield was shattered by the lightning from the Vasilyevic sword. Such a result of the battle stunned all the audience. They simply could not understand why the prophet's sword seemed to have changed into a different sword mistress. She had lost her prophecy ability and only knew how to run away. It wasn't until a spirit sword level sword bearer posted a post on the forum that the secret was revealed. The prophet's sword was still the prophet's sword, and her ability to predict the future had not disappeared. It was just that the future she foresaw was meaningless. Because in the prophet's sword's foresight, there was only one result in all the futures, and that was she would be slashed by Andreevich's attack, and her protective shield would be destroyed. When all the futures she foresaw had the same result, the ability to predict the future lost its meaning, because her future was doomed to be slashed by Andreevich. To put it simply, in the future foreseen by the prophet's sword, he would not be able to avoid Andreevich's violent attack speed. And all the calmness and confidence of the prophet goddess was based on the foreseen future of victory. Once she found that she had no future of victory, the prophet's sword would subconsciously believe that she would lose. With such a subconscious mind, she was doomed to lose in the future. Of course, there was a very important factor in this. It was the lightning effect of the Vasilyevic sword, which could paralyze the prophet goddess for a short period of time. Although the paralysis time was very short and had almost no effect on melee combat, it could interrupt the prophet goddess's prophecy. But could interrupt the prophet goddess's prophecy. Without the ability to prophesy, the prophet's sword, which only had the ability to foresee, was inferior to even the most ordinary famed sword mistress. Chapter 819. No one would have thought that the second team to be eliminated would be the Jerusalem City Academy, led by the Saintess. Before this, whenever there was a Saintess, Jerusalem would always be in the top 3. However, this time, they were the second team to be eliminated, right after Los Angeles. When Ashma left, she was very calm, as if being the second to be eliminated did not make her feel that bad at all. This was because Ashma knew that although the Elite 8 Academies tournament this time was full of powerhouses of the younger generation, there were actually more than 10 famous sword-level contestants. However, with so many famous sword-level sword-bearers, most of them were just pitiful participants. The real champion would still have to be chosen between those two. However, before leaving, Ashma suddenly approached Liu Ling, then lowered her head and whispered something in her ear. This was the first time that the Saintess of Jerusalem had spoken to someone alone in the Elite 8 Academies tournament. The content of their conversation aroused the curiosity of the audience, but unfortunately, no one knew what they said. Ashma left in the end, which meant that Jerusalem Academy had failed. This was a topic that the audience would usually discuss for a long time, but at this moment, it did not cause any waves. This was because everyone's attention was on the next contestant. The pride of the people of Yanjing, Miss Liu Ling, was finally going to show everyone her strength. Seeing that their pride, Liu Ling, stood up, the audience cheered. They began to wonder who Liu Ling would choose as her opponent. In theory, Liu Ling did not have many choices. She could only choose from Gahan, Leslie Dracula, and Andreevich, who were on the first and second levels. Of course, Liu Ling could also choose from a contestant on the third, or 4th level. However, this was meaningless. If she won, she would not be promoted, but if she lost, she would be eliminated, although it was impossible for Liuyan Ling to be eliminated. I want to challenge Yanjing City's contestant, Passerby B. To everyone's surprise, Liuyan Ling's opponent was not the 3 people on the first 2 levels, but Passerby B, who was from the same academy as her. Of course, there was nothing much to say. Passerby B was naturally defeated. However, it wasn't an ugly defeat. It actually lasted a full 5 minutes under Liuyan Ling's attack before Liuyan Ling destroyed its protective shield. Of course, this was the result of Liuyan Ling deliberately suppressing her strength. Liuyan Ling only used the simplest of sword techniques to fight. She didn't use any skills during the entire fight, so it wasn't surprising that a passerby could last for 5 minutes. Big Brother, can you analyze why Miss Lin Lin wants to challenge our own people from Yanjing City? The cameramen all asked the experienced cameraman with a clairaudient. Faced with this question, the clairaudient cameraman could only shrug his shoulders, indicating that he did not know either. However, what the audience did not understand was why Liuyan Ling did not challenge Leslie Dracula and Gahan, whom she could easily defeat. Instead, she chose to challenge her own people. What was Liuyan Ling up to? The audience could not understand at all. Next was Letitia's turn. Like Liuyan Ling, Letitia chose to challenge her own people, Xiao Bai, to maintain the current order. As a result, Gahan was the only one left who did not challenge. In fact, Gahan, who was sitting on the first level, was the most miserable one because there was no benefit to his battles. No matter who he challenged, no matter who he won or lost, the outcome would not change. I challenge Yanjing City's contestant, Passerby B. Passerby B was probably the most tragic guy. He was challenged by Liuyan Ling and Gahan respectively. In addition to the time he challenged Gahan, he had already gone through 3 battles. Of course, the outcome did not need to be written down. Passerby B naturally failed for the 3rd time. I've been defeated by His Majesty Gahan twice in a row. It shows that I'm a very special person in His Majesty's heart. Many years later, the old Passerby B boasted to his grandchildren. At this point, the first round of the second round of challenges had ended. Jean Yujia, Munich, Ashima, Abdullah, and Beckham were eliminated one after another. As a result, the contestants on the 4th level had to challenge each other for one more round to determine the last 3 to be eliminated. After another round of matches that seemed very intense to the audience, but were somewhat boring to Gahan and the other sword bearers, Passerby A, Belgrills, and Xiao Bai were eliminated. Gahan has obtained 24 points. Leslie Dracula has obtained 22 points. Andreevich has obtained 22 points. Letitia has obtained 18 points. Liuyan Ling has obtained 18 points. And Passerby A has obtained 18 points. The host announced the final result. The order after the competition was as follows. Gahan was still sitting on the 1st level. Leslie Dracula and Andreevich were sitting on the 2nd level, while Letitia, Liuyan Ling, Harry Changrua, and Passerby B were sitting on the 3rd level. As a result, 2 of the 8 base cities had been completely eliminated, and the remaining base cities only had their trump cards still sitting on the thrones. Only Yanjing City had 2 people left. Based on the total score of all the base cities, Yanjing City rushed to the 1st place with a total score of 74 points. Yuzhong City's 68 points followed closely behind, followed by London City's 60 points, Berlin City's 54 points, Moscow City's 42 points, and Buenos Aires City's 32 points were at the bottom. Realizing this result, Leslie Dracula could not help but feel a little anxious. She was aiming for the 2nd place, but why was her base city already in the last place? If this continued, she might be eliminated in the next round. However, Leslie Dracula could rest assured because the 3rd round of the 8 Academies tournament was not a simple elimination round. It was also the only round in the 5 rounds that did not require elimination. However, one must not underestimate this round, because the points of this round would be separated from the fixed 24-point system. It was the only round in the tournament where one could freely score points, and it was the only round in which one had to leave the thrones to play. The name of the 3rd round was hide and seek. As the name suggested, this was a game called hide and seek that only children would play. However, this competition did not require the contestants to find any treasures, but their own sword ladies. As everyone knew, the strength of a sword bearer's ability had a lot to do with the tacit understanding between him and his sword lady. Therefore, this competition was actually a test of the tacit understanding between the sword bearer and the sword lady, as well as the sword bearer's ability to deduce the details of the clues. After the competition began, the sword bearer would first release a sword lady, and the staff of the organizing committee would take her away. The sword bearer would then drink a bowl of chuha soup to temporarily cut off the connection between himself and the sword lady. Then, the sword lady would be given 100 hiding places by the organizing committee as her hiding place. The organizing committee would then mix this hiding place among the 100 different places, allowing the sword bearer to find where his sword lady was. Because of the chuha soup, all the contestants' dimensional pockets could not be used. At the same time, the contestants were also prohibited from using any private transportation. If they wanted to go somewhere, they would have to take the public transportation system or simply rely on their own pair of fat legs to find the sword lady. Yinjing City was incomparably huge. If one wanted to run around with their own pair of fat legs, it was estimated that it would be impossible to go to all the 100 places in 10 days and 10 nights. There should be no more than 5 places that the contestants could really find. Therefore, this required the sword bearer to guess their sword lady's preferences. Otherwise, even if they broke their own legs, they would not be able to find their own sword lady. After the competition begins, each of you will have 60 points. Every 3 minutes that pass, 1 point will be deducted. When you find your sword lady, your points will be fixed, and you will also receive the fixed points. If you still do not find anything after 3 hours, then the competition will be declared over, and you will naturally not get any points. The host explained the rules for obtaining points one last time. Then, a staff member handed a slip of paper with a clue to Gahan, and the competition officially began. After that, every contestant received a message on their personal terminal. The message listed 100 places, and Guhan had to find the place his sword lady would choose from among the 100 places. Qingpin, oh Qingpin, it's finally time for you to be of use. Guhan glanced at the 100 places and revealed a trace of a gratified smile. It was indeed a correct choice for him to send Qingpin as a sword lady to participate in the competition. While Gahan was observing these places, the other contestants rushed out like arrows released from a bow and began to madly rush towards the first place they had determined. Gahan, on the other hand, leisurely walked out of the martial arts arena. What place would Qingpin, that adorably annoying glutton, choose? Gahan did not need a brain to guess. Naturally, it would be something related to eating, and furthermore, it would be something related to meat. And among the 100 places, Gahan immediately saw the name of a Chanel pork restaurant. What else was there to guess? Qingpin would definitely choose that place and eat without restraint. The only pity was that this Chanel pork restaurant was a bit far from the martial arts arena. It would probably take Gahan half an hour to get there on the city rail. Forget it, if it was far, then so be it. Gahan shook his head and hurriedly took the city rail. Sure enough, after half an hour, he arrived at the Chanel pork restaurant that was still open for business. Through the glass from afar, Gahan could vaguely see a small figure directly sitting at the table, grabbing the pork and eating to his heart's content. Qingpin. But when Gahan walked into the restaurant and stood next to the table, he was shocked to find that the person eating and drinking to his heart's content wasn't Qingpin at all, but someone else that Gahan had never thought of. Gu Xuanwu, why are you here? Chapter 820. Gu Xianwu, why are you here? Gahan once again asked this question because Gahan clearly handed Gu Xianwu over to the 3 Egyptian gods for protection and let her stay outside the city with peace of mind. But how did she suddenly appear in the city? I haven't been to Yinjing City yet. Can't I see what it looks like here? Gu Xuanwu pouted his mouth in dissatisfaction. Oh right, you came at the right time. This guy keeps circling around me, asking for money. I already told him that I have no money, but he still keeps asking me for money. You can help me pay for him." The person Gu Xianwu was talking about was the lobby manager standing next to him with an awkward face. Hearing Gu Xianwu let Gahan pay, the lobby manager said with relief, "Sir, thank you for your kindness. Your girlfriend has spent a total of 180,000 renminbi. Do you want to pay in one go or pay in installments?" It seemed that the lobby manager did not expect Gahan to be able to pay Gu Xianwu's bill in one go, so he took the initiative to pay in installments. "You and Qingpin are related by blood, right? Eating a meal at Chanel costs 100,000 renminbi. By the way they sit at the table and eat is exactly the same as Qingpin. They can't really be locked up together for a long time. They're actually so compatible." Guhan thought silently in his heart, and then happily paid Gu Xianwu's bill in one go. The lobby manager was so happy that his face turned into a chrysanthemum, and he kept bowing to Gahan. "How long have you been here?" Gahan suddenly asked. 2 hours and 7 minutes. Gu Xianwu answered accurately. As expected of Gahan's daughter, she was so sensitive to the calculation of time. "Then have you seen Qingpin come here?" Gahan asked. "And Qingpin? Has she been here?" Gu Xianwu immediately looked around, then shook his head. "Aunt Qingpin definitely hasn't been here. Otherwise, I would definitely be able to smell her." "That's strange. Qingpin actually didn't come to Chanel." Guhan's calculation was actually wrong. This made Gahan feel a deep sense of defeat. In his mind, he kept recalling the names of the 100 places he had just mentioned, trying to see if he had missed any. With Qingpin's greedy personality, she actually gave up the temptation of Chanel. There must be something more tempting to her. Guhan started his analysis from the perspective of a poor person. Think about it. In a poor person's outlook on life, what is more important than food? Wait, in Qingpin's view, is there really something more important than eating? Guhan sadly found that after thinking for a minute, he still couldn't figure out what in Qingpin's heart could be more important than eating. Could it be sleeping? Qingpin had 2 hobbies, eating and sleeping. Qingpin spent more than half of her life sleeping, and she especially liked to sleep in Guhan's baby pouch. She often slept for an entire day, day and night. But there was one thing. Unless it was a special situation, when it was mealtime, our Qingpin would immediately jump out of bed, never missing a single meal. From this point, it was very obvious that Qingpin loved to eat far more than she loved to sleep. Therefore, Guhan didn't even think about sleeping just now. But since eating wasn't right, then he could only think of places related to sleeping. Coincidentally, among these 100 locations, there were 2 furniture markets which had a lot of soft beds. Maybe Qingpin was sleeping on one of them. Among these 2 locations, one was very close to Gahan's current position, about 5 minutes away. So Gahan prepared to walk there, to see if Qingpin was sleeping on a certain bed. "Go, follow me." Gahan grabbed Gu Xuanwu's hand and pulled her out of the Chanel restaurant, ready to go to the nearest market. And the moment Gu Xuanwu's hand was grabbed by Gahan, it could be seen that Gu Xuanwu wanted to instinctively resist, trying to break free from Gahan's hand. But Gu Xuanwu immediately stopped her instinct. Her face was red, and she let Gahan lead her to jog all the way. Don't misunderstand, this was not a shy blush, but a warm blush, a blush produced after feeling the warmth of the family. If what Gu Xuanwu said was true, then this pitiful child had never been held by his father since he was born. How did you become a human? In fact, when Gu Xuanwu clearly appeared in front of him, Gahan had already discovered that Gu Xuanwu and the Gu Xuanwu he met outside the city before had a fundamental change. This change was not in appearance, but in physique. The Gu Xuanwu that he saw outside the city was a Yuanko that exuded the unique aura of Yuanko from head to toe. But the current Gu Xuanwu was the complete opposite, inside and outside. She had completely become a human. Probably this was the reason why she could only move around in Yanjing City. Speaking of which, this is somewhat similar to Sha Sha. Gahan secretly thought, I am the daughter of a human in Yuanko. Naturally, I have the characteristics of a human in Yuanko. Gu Xuanwu explained in a low voice, as long as I am willing, I can freely switch between human form and Yuanko form. It's just that I can't use any power in human form, Otherwise, I will immediately change back into Yuanko form. That's a bit strange. Hearing Gu Xuanwu's explanation, Gohan couldn't help but have some doubts in his heart, because this was different from the traditional understanding of humans and Yuanko mixed blood. For example, Shishui Takahate Rina. She was a combination of Yuanko's body and human soul. So a part of her body belonged to Yuanko, and the other part belonged to a human, like two dumplings put together. However, the Gu Xuanwu was different. According to her, her body could freely switch between a human and a Yuanko. When she was a human, she was the same human. When she was Yuanko, she was the real Yuanko. This was completely different from Shishui. If the previous Shishui could do this, she probably wouldn't be so entangled with her identity. Then how did you enter the city? What about Bast and the other two? Gohan asked again. The three of them aren't of much use. Gu Xuanwu didn't hide her disdain for the three of them. I only used a small trick, and they went to hide and seek all over the mountain. Gohan was speechless. It was hide and seek again. But things shouldn't be so simple. Among the three of them, Isai's and Anubis's intelligence wasn't high, but Bast was very smart. How could you be tricked by Gu Xuanwu so easily? There must be a problem here. Although he knew there was a problem, Gohan didn't plan to expose it, and continued to ask, "You clearly don't have a personal terminal. The city gate should take you to the personal terminal management office." Although he knew there was a problem, Gohan didn't plan to expose it, and continued to ask, "You clearly don't have a personal terminal. The city gate should take you to the personal terminal management office." To enter the city, it wasn't as simple as being a human. There was still a series of tests, the most important of which was to check your personal terminal. If you don't have a personal terminal, you will be taken to the personal terminal management office by the guards. Then, your DNA will be verified there, and your identity will be confirmed. If there's no DNA data in the database, then you will be locked up in the personal terminal management office, and your identity will be more stringent. They must clarify your identity. Therefore, without a personal terminal and without your DNA in the database, Gu Xuanwu should be locked up in the management office and not wandering around Yanjing City. Who said I don't have a personal terminal? Gu Xuanwu raised her hand, and a slightly bulging personal terminal could be clearly seen under her skin. Ding! Would you like to add Gu Xuanwu to your contact list? Gohan didn't believe it, and used her own personal terminal to touch Gu Xuanwu's personal terminal, and then heard her personal terminal make a notification, asking Gohan if he wanted to add Gu Xuanwu as a friend. This meant that Gu Xuanwu's personal terminal was a genuine personal terminal, which could explain why Gu Xuanwu could enter and leave Yanjing City freely. But then there was a new problem. How did Gu Xuanwu get her own personal terminal? Where did you get your personal terminal? Gohan's voice fluctuated. This was given to me by Auntie Qingpin. Gu Xuanwu covered her personal terminal and said, "It was given to me by Auntie Qingpin before she left. She said that if I wanted to find her, I could take this thing to Yuzhong City." What the hell is this thing? This personal terminal was actually given to Gu Xuanwu by Qingpin. After repeated questioning by Gohan, she finally figured it out a little. Gu Xuanwu once said that when she was a child, she and Qingpin were locked up in a place together for a long time. It was during that time that Gu Xuanwu firmly remembered the smell of Auntie Qingpin, and it was also when they separated that Qingpin gave this personal terminal to Gu Xuanwu. It turned out that Qingpin was the mastermind. Gohan gritted his teeth. Speaking of Qingpin, where the hell did she go? While they were talking, Gohan had already rushed to the furniture city and turned the entire furniture city upside down, but he could not find any trace of Qingpin. Therefore, Gohan had no choice but to take the city railway to the other furniture city. However, the distance between the two furniture cities was very far. Even if he took the city railway, it would take Gohan about 45 minutes to get there. While he was taking the city railway, a message was sent to Gohan's personal terminal through the internet. Participant Andreevich found his sword mistress, Courage Golden Sword, in 1 hour and 17 minutes. He has obtained 35 points. The first winner had appeared. It was Andreevich from Moscow College who was the first to find his sword mistress. That was a total of 35 points. Gahan had only obtained 48 points in the previous 2 rounds. Chapter 821. Where the hell did the poor scammer run off to? In the second furniture store, there was still no sign of Ching Pin. Gahan couldn't help but feel a little anxious. Originally, this kind of anxiety wouldn't easily appear on Gahan. But as Gahan's personality gradually softened, this kind of emotion appeared more and more easily. People were like this. When they were desperate for something, other changes wouldn't be able to affect this person's mood. But once this person had a lot of things that they wanted to protect, this person would become more and more like an ordinary person. So everyone who is reading, please protect the treasures that you should protect. Don't inadvertently lose them. And at this time, the second contestant who found her own sword lady appeared. That was Leslie Dracula, whom Gahan interacted with the most among all the contestants. This girl had obtained 30 points. What does Ching Pin see as more important than eating? Gahan once again pondered, but the result was the same as the previous time. He couldn't think of anything that surpassed eating in Ching Pin's heart. What are you thinking about? Gu Xuanwu held a large roasted sausage in his hand and directly stabbed it into his mouth. Then he bit off a large portion of the roasted sausage and asked Gahan while chewing, "Do you know what Ching Pin likes the most?" It seemed like Gahan really couldn't think of what Ching Pin liked. So he asked Gu Xuanwu, who seemed to be his daughter. That's right, if Gu Xuanwu really spent a lot of time with Ching Pin, then maybe Gu Xuanwu could provide some useful information. Of course it's eating. In the end, Gu Xuanwu's information wasn't surprising at all. Aunt Ching Pin is a great existence that can eat an entire cow in one go. When Gu Xuanwu said this, his face revealed an incomparable expression of admiration. It seemed like Ching Pin really did perform in front of Gu Xuanwu the difficult task of eating an entire cow. Yes, Gahan grunted, hoping that Gu Xuanwu would give him any useful information was simply a delusion. Her understanding of Ching Pin was only limited to eating. Gahan made it sound as if her understanding of Ching Pin was not limited to eating. In fact, most of the people who were watching here only had an understanding of Ching Pin that was limited to eating. But Annie Ching Pin doesn't admit this. Gu Xuanwu did not know that Gahan had already given up on obtaining information from her, as she continued to speak with great interest. I once asked Annie Ching Pin what she liked the most. Is it your favorite food? But Annie Ching Pin wouldn't admit it no matter what. She said that she didn't like to eat the most, but she liked Gahan the most. Speaking till here, Gu Xuanwu suddenly slapped her own head. That's right. Annie Ching Pin once said the name Gahan. How could I forget it? And even stupidly asked you what my father's name was. Even if you remembered this name, at that time, you didn't know that Gahan was your father. Gahan curled her lips. Suddenly, Gahan also wanted to slap her own head. Gahan. That's right. Ching Pin's favorite thing really isn't eating, but Gahan Gahan's face was flushed with excitement, as well as a deep sense of self-blame. I'm really a fool. I actually only saw Ching Pin stuffing herself with food, but I didn't see Ching Pin's attachment to me. I forgot that she likes to stay in her own nursery bag to sleep the most. I forgot that she likes to call Gahan's name the most when she has nothing to do. I forgot that she likes to run to my side when she sleeps the most and lie on my body to sleep peacefully. I forgot that she likes to stuff her feet into her mouth the most. All right, this doesn't count. I forgot that without me by her side, even if I gave her countless braised pork, she still wouldn't be able to swallow it. P.S. This is Gahan thinking too much. Ching Pin's favorite place to live the most is Mia. I'm still thinking about eating stupidly. Where did my usual intelligence go? Gahan suddenly felt a lot of emotions. The expression on her face was constantly changing, looking like a moving emoji pack. Gu Xuanwu, who was looking at her, was stunned and began to doubt whether this guy was that cold and ruthless father. I think I know where Ching Pin is. Gahan let out a long sigh of relief. After figuring out that Ching Pin's favorite thing was herself, Gahan already knew where Ching Pin was. Where is he? Although she didn't know why Gahan was looking for Ching Pin, Gu Xuanwu still couldn't help but ask. She also missed Aunt Ching Pin, and she missed the milk fragrance on Aunt Ching Pin's body. Since smelling this smell again, Gu Xuanwu had been insomnia for several consecutive nights. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so anxious to run to Yanjing City to find Gahan. It's here. An address was projected in Gahan's personal terminal, only to see the words Bone-Cold Ice Drink Wholesale Market written on it. Why is it here? Gu Xuanwu asked blankly. Qing Popper is a cute girl who can't read, so she could only listen to other people reading her name. Then she must have heard Gu Han as Gu Han. Gu Han, who had regained his intelligence, immediately guessed what had happened. Fortunately, the Bone-Cold Ice Drink Wholesale Market wasn't far from Gahan's current location. Gahan only needed to pull Gu Xuanwu at a speed of 40 kilometers per hour for a whole 15 minutes to reach the destination. And once they reached the Bone-Cold Ice Drink Wholesale Market, Gahan could hear a loud and clear cry. Ugh! Gahan, where are you? Qingpin is hungry. Qingpin wants to eat meat. Qingpin wants to go to Chanel. Qingpin doesn't want to stay here. Hearing this voice, Gahan knew that Qingpin couldn't run away. She was definitely in this Bone-Cold Ice Drink Wholesale Market. Sure enough, when Gahan walked into the wholesale market, he saw a group of people surrounding a shop. Gahan went forward to secretly observe and found a group of distressed shop owners holding popsicles in their hands to tease the pitiful Qingpin. And while Qingpin was shouting Gahan's name, shouting that she wanted to eat meat, she also took the popsicle that the shop owner handed over. With a crunch, she bit off the whole popsicle and swallowed it in one breath. Gahan, Qingpin's stomach is so cold. Qingpin is pregnant. Hurry up and come out. Qingpin's snot and tears flowed together, but she didn't forget to continue stuffing popsicles into her mouth. These shop owners were really unlucky to have Qingpin's crying sound that shook the 9 heavens, not only making them unable to do business, but also making their heads hurt. The invincible, cute sword maiden could only try to calm her down with popsicles. Unfortunately, the most effective thing to deal with crying little brats was useless at this moment. Instead, it was like throwing a meat bun at a dog. It was like throwing a meat bun at a dog. It was like throwing a meat bun at a dog. Just the amount of popsicles that Qingpin ate probably exceeded tens of thousands of RMB. And behind Qingpin, there were 2 committee members with armbands standing there. They were responsible for protecting and making sure that the sword maiden didn't run around. But at this moment, their faces, which were usually solemn, had an ashamed expression that made it seem like they wanted to escape. How could this Yuzhong guy sword maiden be so amazing? They had been working as the staff of the 8 Academy Conference for more than 10 years, and they had never seen a sword maiden who could cry and eat so much. Gahan also felt that he couldn't observe her in secret anymore, otherwise his reputation would be completely ruined by this cute girl. So, Gahan directly pushed through the crowd of onlookers and walked in front of the shop where Qingpin was sitting. Lord Gahan, you're finally here. Seeing Gahan's arrival, the 2 committee members finally shed tears of relief and said with great emotion, "Great, they were finally free." Gahan. Seeing Gahan appear, Qingpin immediately threw away the 2 popsicles in her hands and put on an extremely excited posture. Her chubby little feet jumped hard on the shop owner's unlucky freezer, and she directly jumped into Gahan's arms. Gahan, they're so bad. They lied to me that you're here. They lied to me that there's meat to eat here, and they almost turned me into a popsicle. Gahan. Qingpin rubbed her cold little face against Gahan's face again, and wiped her lips that were covered with cold syrup on Gahan's neck. Then, she wailed pitifully, as if eating popsicles was a very unlucky thing. Ahem, you actually came here to eat meat? Gahan's expression was a little ugly. Yes, yes. Qingpin nodded vigorously, pointed to the 2 embarrassed staff behind her, and said angrily, I said I wanted to eat meat, but the 2 of them told me to ask you for meat. Then, they said you were here, so I came here. Gahan already didn't know what to say. It seemed that he was just thinking too much, and in the end, he still ended up eating Qingpin's favorite food. You've already eaten so much cold stuff today, so you're not allowed to eat any more fatty meat, or you'll have a stomachache. Gahan randomly found a reason that mothers often use to reject Qingpin's request to eat meat. This scammer, don't even think about eating meat for the rest of the day. I'll bite. The angry Qingpin was about to use her teeth to take revenge on Gahan, but Gohan directly stuffed an apple into her mouth. "Good children should eat more fruits," said Gohan. Participant Gohan found his own sword maiden, Ching Pin's sword, in 1 hour and 46 minutes, obtained 25 points. Gohan became the third participant to find his own sword maiden. Although he was a little unhappy, the competition still had to continue. So, just as Gohan was about to return to the training field, he suddenly felt a small hand tugging at his clothes. "I finally meet you, Sir Military Governor." Hearing the two words, military governor, Gohan instinctively turned around and saw a cute black-haired girl wearing a small golden straw hat looking at him with a smile. "I think I've seen you before." Seeing the girl's appearance clearly, Gohan said instinctively, "What a really old-fashioned line. Long time no see. I'm the true, everlasting nation. Do you still remember me?" A character buried in 650 chapters. Ha ha. I wonder who still remembers this character. Chapter 822. A long time ago. Actually, just a few months ago, when the King Arthur's betrayal dungeon was still being cleared, Gohan had bought 6 tokens of the Heavenly Sword from the auction house. During this process, Gohan got to know the young mistress of the auction house. Oh, that's not right. The young master, the true everlasting nation. After parting ways at the auction house, Gohan and the true everlasting nation had not communicated in the game. Who would have thought that they would meet again in real life? The true everlasting nation was still dressed as a cute girl in real life. According to the rules of the game, the gender of the game character must be the same as the gender of the character in real life. In other words, the true everlasting nation should also be a boy in real life. Thinking of this, Gohan instinctively took a step back. Logically speaking, it was said that there was a period of time when girls with big dicks were very popular. Even now, there was still the existence of the Big Dicks Divine sect on the internet. However, Gohan guaranteed that he did not have such a preference. But thinking about it carefully, Gohan seemed to be more thorough. After all, there was still the existence of Gu Xian Fate. Lord Military Governor, do you think that Chang Ruo is very strange? Seeing Gohan's reaction, the true everlasting nation could not help but say gloomily, "In this world, there are many things that people cannot choose for themselves. If I had a choice, Chang Ruo would really like to be reincarnated into a real girl's body and not be a hateful boy." Ahem. Gohan coughed. "This is not your fault, it's the world's fault. But now that medicine is so advanced, you can change your gender." What Gohan said was the truth. Even before the apocalypse, humans had already successfully mastered the technology to change their gender. Now that medicine was even more advanced, other than the fact that they could not give birth, they would be exactly the same as a real girl in other aspects. I am the only descendant of the Chang Ruo family. If I change my gender, then the Chang Ruo family will disappear from this world. Chang Ruo, I cannot be so selfish. The true everlasting kingdom said sorrowfully. It turned out that he had not chosen to change his sex because of his family's inheritance. Chang Ruo family. Gohan muttered to himself for a while. Gohan had heard of the Chang Ruo family before, but their family was not an Emperor Sword family. In fact, they did not even have an Immortal Sword rank sword wielder. The founder of the family was merely a Spirit Sword rank sword wielder. However, Chang Ruo's family head had something that made everyone click their tongues in wonder. This was because every 3 generations, the heir of this family would definitely become a sword bearer, and at the very least, they would become a famed sword-level sword bearer. No one knew the reason behind it, but it had indeed happened. It was precisely because a sword bearer would be born every 3 generations that the Chang Ruo family had never produced any top-notch sword bearers, nor did they have much of a background. However, they were able to continue as a sword bearer family, surpassing many families that had produced immortal sword-level sword bearers. Wait, isn't the Chang Ruo family the Chang Ruo family from London? Isn't Harry Chang Ruo the heir of that family? Could it be? Gohan carefully looked at the cross-dressing Chang Ruo country. Removing the hair and makeup, wasn't this cross-dressing Chang Ruo country the same Harry Chang Ruo who had just been competing with him for the position of the throne? When did you change your clothes? Gahan asked with a frown. I didn't change my clothes. This is what I'm wearing inside the robe. Speaking up to this point, Harry Chong Rua suddenly beamed with joy. Isn't this very convenient? As long as the robe shines on my body, I'm a boy. As long as the robe is taken off, I become a cute girl. I wish you happiness. I'll return to the training field first. You can continue looking for your Gryffindor sword. Although Guhan couldn't accept this idea, this was the freedom of others. Guhan didn't want to criticize others, so he decided to leave the 36 stratagems. He had to get as far away from Harry Changrua as possible first. Wait, Mr. Military Governor, can you do me a favor? Harry Changrua hurriedly pulled Gohan's hand and pleaded with a kitten-like gaze. I've already looked in 4 places, but I still can't find Gryffindor. I know that Mr. Military Governor is the smartest man in the world. Please help me think where Gryffindor will be. This is your sword mistress. Why are you asking me? Gohan's frown deepened. Who would ask for help from their competitor? Mr. Military Governor. Harry Changrua suddenly hugged Gohan's waist and began to act like a spoiled child. All right, let go of me first. Gahan was helpless. If he hit a woman on the streets, his reputation in Yanjing would probably be even worse. So, Gahan could only agree to Harry Changrua's request. Show me your 100 locations. Harry Changrua quickly announced the 100 locations that belonged to him. Gahan only took a glance and pointed to a place. Go there and take a look. Gryffindor is most likely there. Cat Paradise. Harry Changrua looked at the location that Gahan pointed out and felt baffled. How could Gryffindor be in Cat Paradise? I've already pointed it out for you. Whether you believe me or not is up to you. I don't care. With that, Gahan pulled Goo Black Tortoise and disappeared from Harry Changrua's side. After separating from Harry Changrua, Goo Black Tortoise asked Gahan curiously, why is Gryffindor in Cat Paradise? Because Gryffindor's body is sealed with the soul of a lion. So, Gryffindor's soul is built on the foundation of the soul of a lion. In other words, Gryffindor is a lion. Gahan paused. Lions belong to the feline family. No feline would dislike Cat Paradise. I think Gryffindor must be having a good time there. Not happy. Qingpin is not having a good time at all. Qingpin poked her head out of the pouch in front of Gahan's chest and stroked her cold belly. Qingpin will never go to Gahan's place again. They're all liars. They've spoiled Qingpin's little belly. Aunt Qingpin, are you pregnant? Goo Black Tortoise tilted her head and looked at Qingpin in the pouch. I remember Aunt Lativa touching her belly like this when she was pregnant. Yes, yes. The poor man nodded his head repeatedly. Then, his chubby face revealed a mysterious expression of, I'll only tell you in secret. It's been 3 months. Shut up. Gahan pressed Qingpin down. This cheater. Strange. Where have I seen that swordsman before? With Qingpin's departure, the chilling bone-cold drinks wholesale market gradually regained its peace. Everyone returned to their own shops to continue their business. However, the person on the second floor of the shop muttered to himself with a puzzled look. He had witnessed the entire process from the second floor, and to his surprise, he had seen the sword wielder who had taken the sword Maiden away somewhere before. He looked very familiar. But where have I seen him before? I haven't even stepped out of the shop for a month. The person could not figure it out, no matter how much he thought about it. He had no choice but to put down the camera in his hand and return to his computer. He was ready to continue scrolling through the forum to see if there was any interesting news. Then, he would brag to some of his familiar friends on the forum or argue with a few familiar opponents. The post in broad daylight, the exit management office publicly posts KB, appeared in front of him. Why did this post get pushed to the front page again? Isn't it just KB? What's there to be excited about? The person had read this post dozens of times and was really not interested in reading it again. So, just as he was about to skip this post, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration. Wait, the swordsman just now seems to be. He quickly clicked on the post again and found the photo in the post. He flipped to the photo that was taken from a top-down perspective. He could only see half of the man's face and the woman squatting under the man's crotch. Then, he took a picture of the swordsman from the perspective of the second floor from his camera. After comparing them, the person in the two pictures was exactly the same. Big news! Big news! The person laughed so hard that his nose was crooked. I can finally make a big news story. So, a few minutes later, a post titled "The Truth Revealed," the former master of the sword garret in Yuzhong City is a big pervert, appeared in the Yinjing City forum and instantly caused an uproar. Participant Harry Chong Ruo has found his own sword mistress, Gryffindor sword. Time used, 2 hours and 03 minutes. Points awarded, 19. Under Guhan's guidance, Harry Chong Ruo successfully found his own sword mistress. Contestant Ladia found her sword lady, William, the second sword. Took 2 hours and 04 minutes. Obtained 19 points. In just a minute, Ladia also successfully found her sword lady. This way, there were only 2 contestants left who had not found their sword lady, and both of them were contestants from Yinjing City. Liu Ling and the passerby B still had not found their sword lady. Seeing this scene, the audience in Yinjing City could not help but feel a little excited. There was less than an hour left. If Yinjing City did not get anything in this round, it would be fine if their points were pulled down by a lot. What's worse was that Yinjing City would lose face. Didn't this mean that the swordsmen in Yinjing City and their sword lady had a very bad rapport? Or did the descendant of the Lionian family of this generation have a very bad rapport with their sword lady? Chapter 823. Come to think of it, I still don't know who Lionian Ling's famed sword mistress is. Just as Gahan was wondering if Lionian Ling did not know much about her famed sword mistress, his personal terminal rang. Gohan opened it and saw that it was Lionian Ling calling. Didn't she fall out with me? Why is she contacting me? Gohan shook his head in confusion, but he still quickly picked up Lionian Ling's call. Do me a favor. I can find my sword mistress. Lionian Ling went straight to the point and asked Gohan to help her find sword mistress. Sure, Gohan agreed readily. But you have to tell me who your famed sword mistress is first. The 3-foot sword. Lionian Ling also answered readily. It really is the 3-foot sword. Gohan smiled bitterly when he heard the name. The 3-foot sword. What a familiar name. Once upon a time, this was the famed sword mistress that Gohan was determined to obtain. However, due to various reasons, his famed sword mistresses became the Qidian sword and the Juzi sword. The 3-foot sword, which was originally the #1 famed sword mistress, naturally had no fate with Gohan. However, thinking about it carefully, the Juzi sword and the Qidian sword were not weaker than the 3-foot sword. If that was the case, Gohan did not suffer much of a loss. He did not expect the 3-foot sword to fall into Lionian Ling's hands after he had no fate with it. However, there was nothing strange about this. The Lionian family was the strongest family among the families, and Lionian Ling was one of the strongest famed sword mistresses in the world. The 3-foot sword had also become the sword mistress of the Lionian family many times in history. It was not strange that Lionian Ling could be in sync with the 3-foot sword. However, this made Gohan feel strange. Logically speaking, the Lionian family should be the family that knew the 3-foot sword the best. This was because the Lionian family had coordinated with the 3-foot sword the most and kept the most complete information about it. It was impossible for Lionian Ling to not know the 3-foot sword's preferences. Where did you look? Gohan asked after some thought. I found 6 places. They are the Bronze Museum, of History Museum, of History Museum, of Ancient History Museum, of Marine Biology Museum, of Marine Biology Museum, of Primitive Times, and of Ancient History Museum. Lionian Ling of the 6 places. Why are these 6 places all museums, exhibition halls, and memorial halls? Gohan asked in confusion. That's because the 1-meter sword likes these places. We found her at these places during the previous 6 astral competitions. Fleeting Lin said matter-of-factly. That's because the 3-foot sword likes these places. I found her at these places the last 6 times she participated in the Octagon meet. Lionian Ling said matter-of-factly. Could you cheat in Yinjing City, be any more subtle? Are there any similar places on the list? Since the 3-foot sword had gone to such places the last 6 times, it clearly meant that the 3-foot sword had a special liking for such places. In that case, she might even go to a similar place. No, there are only these 6 exhibition halls on the list, Liuyan Ling answered very quickly. Send me a copy of your list. After Gahan said that, a document was sent to Gahan's personal terminal. Gahan looked through it quickly and tried to figure out. Then, he looked around and immediately had an answer in his heart. He said to Liuyan Ling, your name. Gahan suddenly uttered such a baffling sentence. Are you kidding me? Don't you know my name? Don't tell me you've already forgotten my name? Liuyan Ling snorted coldly. Gahan seemed to be able to hear a storm brewing on the other end of the communication. Look at the list of places again. If you still don't understand, I don't care anymore, Gahan replied coldly. In the list of places projected by Gahan's personal terminal, a place called Your Name was written, and there was a subtle note video cafe below it. Wait. Liuyan Ling quickly flipped through the list. After a few seconds, she asked awkwardly, why are you so sure that she is there? I don't have much time left. I can't waste any more time on the road. If you believe me, come over. If you don't believe me, I'll find her myself. Although Gahan's words were quite flat, the hidden unhappiness in them could not be concealed. Wait for me there. I'll be right there. With that, Liuyan Ling hung up. Why should I wait for her? Gahan looked at the cafe with the Your Name sign beside him. Inside the cafe, a gentle and quiet girl was sitting on a wooden rattan chair decorated with a few pots of orchids. She was drinking her coffee elegantly and looking at a tablet in her hand. Fortunately, Gahan had unrealistic expectations for the 3-foot sword, so he had a good grasp of the information on the 3-foot sword. Naturally, he knew what the 3-foot sword, the sword maiden, looked like. Hello, Lady 3-foot. Can I sit here? The 3-foot sword moved his gaze away from the iPad 12 Pro in his hand. The iPad 12 was the last version of the iPad produced before the apocalypse. It could be sold for millions of RMB on the black market. Even if you had the money, you might not be able to buy it. The iPad in the 3-foot sword's hand was well preserved. It could still be used even after 1,000 years. It could be seen that the owner of the iPad had protected it very well. This was clearly not something that ordinary people could own. Gahan guessed that Liuyan Ling must have given it to the 3-foot sword. How did Gahan know that Liuyan Ling had given it to the 3-foot sword? This was because there was a square family crest printed on the corner of the iPad. This family crest was naturally the family crest of the Liuyan aristocratic family. The design of this emblem was very complicated. It was not a simple geometric figure, nor was it a traditional emblem like a rose or a rose. There was a man and a woman drawn on it. They stood on either side of the crest, and their hands were grabbing a long sword in the middle of the crest. As for which lady swordplay this sword belonged to, Gahan did not know. It did not seem to be a lady swordplay that humans knew of. This was because a lady swordplay expert had once magnified the crest of the Liuyan aristocratic family by tens of times. However, they had discovered that the sword in the middle of the crest was not a sword known to humans. This was rather strange. In reality, it would be a long time before Gahan figured out the origins of this sword. Then, he would sigh at the absurdity of the world. Of course, Gahan did not care about this sword now. His attention was on the 3-foot sword lady. She looked at Gahan carefully, then nodded and said very gently, "Have a seat. This is a coffee shop. You don't have to ask for my opinion." Indeed, it was as the information said. The strongest lady swordplay, the 3-foot sword lady, was actually a very gentle girl. She was like a lady from an ancient family. She would smile at anyone she saw. "Why are you here?" Gahan asked curiously. "Do you know that your lady swordplay is going crazy looking for you? Otherwise, she wouldn't have asked me, her enemy, for your whereabouts. Because there's something interesting here." The 3-foot sword lady twirled the spoon in her coffee cup. "In my previous life, I really wanted to watch this movie that had just been discovered. Unfortunately, I fell into a deep sleep before I could watch it. Now that I'm awake, I naturally want to finish watching this movie." Movie? Gahan was stunned. He raised his head and looked at the counter. There were a few posters pasted on the counter. This coffee shop provides electronic copies of all kinds of old movies. You can enjoy the fragrant coffee while enjoying the wonderful old movies. This was the most eye-catching poster. This poster also clearly showed why this coffee shop was called the video coffee shop. This was because this coffee shop specialty was to provide copies of old movies to its customers. The second poster said, newly rescued old movie, 45% intact. From the classic Before the Apocalypse, Big Fish Begonia. Under a natural disaster, a tragic love story between a man and a fish. There were many other posters pasted beside this poster. They were all information about old movies that had just been discovered. With the continuous excavation of the relics before the apocalypse, many such old movies would be discovered. And this coffee shop could have its own foothold in Yanjing City because it could collect a lot of the latest movies. There were many such posters. Gahan's eyes kept sweeping over them. Finally, he stopped at a poster that was pressed in the innermost by many posters. The content of the poster was not clear. Only the 4 words, "Your name," were exposed. It was the same as the name of this coffee shop. Gahan knew this movie. When this movie was discovered, it caused a lot of sensation. People were amazed that the animated movie Before the Apocalypse could be so exquisite. Unfortunately, the completeness was not high. About 65% of the scenes could not be played. Therefore, people did not know the story of this movie. This video coffee shop was probably open at that time. In order to increase its popularity, it took the same name as that famous movie. At that time, the 3-foot sword could only see the name of each location when choosing the location. Therefore, it could be inferred that the 3-foot sword wanted to watch this movie called Your Name. Therefore, he chose this coffee shop. However, why did the 3-foot sword want to watch this movie so much? Gahan was a little puzzled. I've killed 2 Yuan Kos. One was called San Yi, and the other was called Long. The 3-foot sword's face suddenly showed a touch of melancholy. Maybe I shouldn't have killed them. They didn't have it easy. Chapter 824. Sir, what kind of coffee would you like? The waitress asked softly as she approached Gahan. The same as this lady. Gahan pointed at the 1-foot sword's coffee. However, upon hearing Gahan's request, the waitress looked troubled. Sir, this lady's coffee is a little special. I'm afraid we can't give it to you. Special? Just as Gahan was about to ask what was so special about it, the 1-foot lady smiled and took out a glass bottle the size of a teacup. It contained a thick, golden yellow liquid. He didn't know what it was. There's nothing special about my coffee. I just add a little of this. I wonder if Mr. Gahan would like to try it? The 1-foot lady shook the glass bottle slightly. The golden liquid seemed to contain some kind of demon. Thank you, 1-foot lady. Gahan, will do as you say. Gahan nodded. Mr. Gahan, do you really want to add it? The 1-foot lady opened the bottle, and a thick, bitter smell filled the entire cafe. Just the smell alone made the waitress beside Gahan pinch her nose. Is this bile? Gahan took a sniff and guessed. Mr. Gahan, you have a good nose. The 1-foot sword revealed a surprised expression. She knew that Gahan had guessed the origin of the golden liquid. This is the bile of the world's most poisonous golden boruo snake. A drop of bile tastes like 100 tons of bitter gourds stacked together. Mr. Gahan, would you like a drop? I wonder how much did the 3-chi goddess add? Gahan asked. 3 drops. The 1-foot lady raised 3 fingers. 3 drops is too troublesome. Gahan smiled faintly and snatched the bottle of bile from the 3-foot sword lady's hand. Then he poured a quarter of the bottle of bile, which was about half the size of a coffee cup, into the cup. He then gestured for the waiter to make him a cup of coffee. It's best for men not to be stubborn. Sometimes bitterness can kill you. At that time, don't stop drinking after just 1 sip. Don't waste the high-quality bile that the Lun Yin clan painstakingly gathered. The 3-chi lady was taken aback at first, but then she said indifferently. From her words, she seemed to be a little displeased with Gahan's pretentious behavior. Clearly, she didn't think that Gahan would really drink this cup of coffee with so much golden Borneo snake bile. Gahan smiled and said nothing more, because no matter how much he said, it would be useless. He might as well drink the entire cup of coffee. Only then would the other party have nothing to say. Soon, this cup of bitter coffee was served to him. Judging from the waiter's expression as if his mother had died, the taste of this cup of coffee must be indescribable. Gahan took the coffee and poured it into his mouth without hesitation. As soon as the coffee entered his tongue, a bitterness that made his nerves tremble spread throughout Gahan's body. Gahan's hand trembled as he held the cup of coffee. It was as if he would spill the coffee on the table if he wasn't careful. "Don't be too stubborn," the 1-foot lady reminded gently. However, Gahan was unmoved. He tilted his head back and poured the coffee into his stomach. "Sigh." The 1-foot lady sighed, then said to the waitress, "Miss, please call an ambulance and send this gentleman to the hospital to have his stomach pumped." "There's no need. The taste is a little bitter, but it's not enough to kill me." Gahan waved his hand. Although there were a few drops of sweat on his forehead and his body trembled from time to time, it was obvious that Gahan was fine. "You're amazing." The 3-Chi Empress was convinced this time. She then nodded and said, "Even I, the 3-Chi Empress, would only dare to drink 3 drops of this golden ripple snake's bile. Mr. Guhan, your pain tolerance is truly beyond imagination. This little girl admires you. I admire you. This is also from training." Guhan smiled nonchalantly. "Lady, you must know that snake gall can improve one's eyesight. When I was young, I needed a pair of good eyes when I practiced martial arts. Thus, I ate 3 raw snake galls every day to develop this pair of eyes. A little bit of bile is nothing to me." "I see." The 1-foot lady nodded, then looked into Gahan's eyes. "May I know why Mr. Gahan is looking for this little lady? It can't be that you just want a cup of bitter coffee from this little lady, right? I want to ask you a question. Since you're Ling's sword maiden, you must know what happened to Ling recently. Please don't misunderstand. I'm not interested in Ling's private life. I only want to know why Ling suddenly hates me so much." Gahan finally asked this question. Originally, Gahan didn't want to ask this question because Gahan didn't think that Liunian Ling was that important to him. However, Gahan still asked this question in the end. This was the first time Gahan couldn't control his mouth. The 1-foot lady seemed to be hesitating whether to answer Gahan's question. However, at this moment, the infant pouch in front of Gahan's chest suddenly began to move. "What good food are you eating? Why don't you ask Qing Pin to come with us?" The poor man used his hands and feet to climb out of the incubator bag and onto the table. Then he saw that there was still half a bottle of golden Buruo snake bile left on the table. This resplendent color was extremely tempting, as if it was a rare delicacy in the world. "You're all bad people. If I don't ask Qing Pin to drink something delicious. Qing Pin also wants to drink a mouthful." After saying that, Qing Popper grabbed the bottle of golden rippling snake bile at lightning speed and gulped it down in one gulp. This unlucky child's appetite was really big. Good times. Qing Pin couldn't say anything else. She directly fell onto the table and fainted. She was already exhaling more than she was inhaling. This foodie finally ate herself to death. "Is she okay?" The 1-meter lady stretched out her palm and rubbed Qing Pin's stomach. Then she burped. A bitter smell that could suffocate everyone instantly filled the cafe. The waiters had already fled out. The 2 staff members of the committee who were responsible for watching over the 1-meter lady could only hold their noses in tears and breathe through their mouths. In an instant, the 1-meter lady seemed to see something. Her eyebrows suddenly jumped, and her hand moved away from Qing Pin's stomach. "Mr. Gahan, you'd better keep this question in your heart." The 1-meter lady's eyes suddenly showed some pity. "Mr. Gahan, you'll have a lot of troubles in the future." What did the 1-meter sword mean? Gahan faintly sensed that the 1-meter sword seemed to know more than he imagined. Fleeting time, Lin panted as he arrived at the entrance of your name. When he saw his sword mistress chatting happily with Guhan, he was immediately angered. He pushed open the door and barged into the cafe. "My name? Miss Ling. Hurry up. Enter the data. It'll be 2 hours and 34 minutes in 10 seconds. The 2 staff members standing next to the 1-meter lady heaved a long sigh of relief. Then They quickly connected to the committee's computer and entered the message that Liu Ling had found her sword maiden. Participant Liu Ling found her sword maiden's 3-meter sword in 2 hours and 33 minutes. She obtained 9 points. With this prompt, the 6th person to find her sword maiden was born. The last person, passerby B, only had 27 minutes left. Only God knew if he could find her cyan rainbow sword. What did you guys talk about? The first thing that Liu Ling did when she found the 1-meter sword was not to greet her sword maiden. Instead, she threw herself on the table and interrogated the 1-meter sword aggressively. It was as if she was very afraid that the 1-meter sword would tell Gahan something. We talked about some things that happened in the past. It brought back a lot of memories. Mr. Gahan is really a person who knows how to chat. The 1-meter sword smiled, stood up, and said to Gahan, "The movie is over, and my sword maiden is here. I should go. See you later, Mr. Gahan." After that, the 1-meter sword took the initiative to pull the confused Liu Ling out of the cafe. Gahan, who did not get any information, smiled bitterly. He grabbed Qing Pin, who was lying motionless on the table like a plush toy, and left the cafe with Gu Xuanwu. When Gahan returned to the martial arts field, Song Hama was already waiting for Gahan at the intersection. Originally, he was still shopping with Cast Cloud Iron when he was called over by Gahan. Then, Gahan directly handed Gu Xuanwu to Song Hama. After instructing Song Hama not to leave this guy at any time, he returned to the throne. At this time, the 3rd round of the competition was officially over. In the end, passerby B still could not find his sword maiden and could only dejectedly get a 0. As a result, Yuzhong University, who had fallen to 2nd place in the 2nd round, rushed back to 1st place with a total score of 93 points. Yinjing College temporarily took 2nd place with a score of 83 points. 3rd place was London College with 79 points. 4th place was Moscow College with 75 points. 5th place was Berlin College with 73 points. 6th place was Buenos Aires College with 62 points. The audience was very dissatisfied with this result. The 4th round was about to begin, but Yinjing City actually fell behind Yuzhong City. This was a great humiliation. If it was not for the fact that the person sitting on the throne was the eldest daughter of the Liu clan, these angry people would have already started cursing. Forget it. Regardless of whether they cursed or not, the 4th round of the competition had begun. Chapter 825. Little girl, what is the relationship between you and Gahan? Song Hama, who was told by Gahan to take care of Gu Xuanwu, looked at Gu Xuanwu with a headache. Beside Song Hama was Cast Cloud Iron, who was even more in a headache. Anyone who was in the middle of a lovey-dovey shopping trip would explode if they were suddenly called to see their child. He is an irresponsible man, Gu Xuanwu said coldly. The irresponsible in Gu Xuanwu's words was naturally irresponsible towards him and his mother. But in Song Hama's ears, it became irresponsible between a man and a woman. After all, Gu Xuanwu looked a little older than Gahan. No one would think that Gu Xuanwu was Gahan's daughter. I didn't expect Gahan to be this kind of person, Cast Cloud Iron said indignantly. Then, she pinched Song Hama's waist and warned him solemnly, "If you dare to mess around with little girls, the rest of your life will be over." "But what does it have to do with me?" Song Hama said bitterly. "Uncle Song Hama, what will the 4th round be? Tell me about it." The scene was a little noisy, so Gu Xuanwu didn't hear clearly what the host said. She could only ask Song Hama again. "Don't call me uncle. You look older than me." Song Hama smiled bitterly and explained, "The 4th round of the competition will be carried out in pairs. Then, they will enter a special dungeon created by Sword Maiden Online and fight as a team. The team that kills the most Yuan songs will get the most points, and so on." Sword Lady Online. What is that? Gu Xuanwu asked puzzledly. This was her first time entering human society. Naturally, she had never heard of Sword Lady Online. But in Song Hama's ears, it became inconceivable. There were humans in this world who didn't know about Sword Lady Online. Although she was puzzled, Song Hama still explained Sword Lady Online to Gu Xuanwu. "So it's like this. I'm so envious. If only I could enter Sword Lady online. Gu Xuanwu said to herself. Is it difficult? If you want, you can enter the game through your personal terminal, but the gaming experience is much worse than the gaming helmet, Song Hama said. As soon as Song Hama's voice fell, he discovered that the Gu Xuanwu beside him was completely motionless. F***CK. Don't enter the game here. Do you want me to carry you back? Song Hama had seen the Black Tortoise's state many times. It was clearly in the game's state. This made Song Hama feel very annoyed. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to continue shopping today. It was all that damn Gahan's fault. What kind of person did he throw at him? Seeing the name above his head, Gahan let out a small sigh of relief. Although it was clear in advance that a new character image would be created after entering the game. Moreover, they would not have any contact with the main world of the game and would only appear in the instance dungeon. However, Gahan was still a little worried. If the name of the military governor was exposed at this time, it wouldn't be fun. At this time, Gahan was in a game instance dungeon that was temporarily opened. The environment of the instance dungeon was a huge forest. Around Gahan was a circle of transparent light walls. Outside the light walls was a deep and dark forest. There seemed to be many terrifying existences hidden in the forest. 7 contestants. You have 5 minutes to form a team. Each team cannot exceed 2 people. You can also act alone. The host's voice sounded in the instance dungeon. The competition time is 2 hours. Mouse level Yuan Ko has 1 point. Tiger level Yuan Ko has 3 points. Ghost level Yuan Ko has 10 points. Soul level Yuan Ko has 30 points. Dragon level Yuan Ko has 100 points. Dragon level Yuan Ko has 300 points. Nether level Yuan Ko has 1,000 points. Meteor level Yuan Ko has 3,000 points. Now, you're free to form a team. Almost at the moment when the announcement was made, everyone started to move. At this time, the relationship between the contestants could be seen. First, Lian Yinling was surrounded by 4 people at the same time. Except for Andreevich, almost everyone appeared next to Lian Yinling, including Harry Chong Rua, who had tried to get close to Gahan before. He also appeared next to Lian Yinling, hoping to form a team with Lian Yinling. Lian Yinling shook her head. Then, she grabbed Passerby B's clothes and took a step back, indicating that she would form a team with Passerby B, who also belonged to Yanjing Academy. This seemed to be a very normal choice. Wasn't it normal to form a team with a classmate from the same academy? But in fact, this was an abnormal choice. According to past experience, the strong would only form a team with the strong and wouldn't care about the fact that they belonged to the same academy. So, normally, Lian Yinling's best choice should be to form a team with Andreevich or Gahan. Even if Andreevich and Gahan didn't take the initiative to look for her, there were still Leslie Dracula and Harry Chong Rua. No matter how one looked at it, they were stronger than the weakest Passerby B. But since Lian Yinling had quit, Gahan and Andreevich seemed to be the best people to hug. But unexpectedly, everyone went to Andreevich, and no one came to look for Gahan. Although Gahan didn't care about forming a team with him, it was still a very uncomfortable thing to be ignored like this. In the end, all 3 teams were formed. Lian Yinling formed a team with Passerby B. Harry Chong Rua and Leslie Dracula formed a team. Lady and Andreevich formed a team, and Gahan formed a team all by himself. Although Gahan didn't understand at first, he immediately realized that the reason why these people didn't choose to form a team with him was probably because of his Yuzhong University's ranking on the scoreboard. The points produced by forming a team were shared by the team members, which meant that the number of kills of 2 people in the team was shared by both parties, which was equivalent to having 2 people's kill points. The final points obtained after the competition were divided by 1,000, and the final points would be added to the points obtained before the competition, becoming the overall score of the 4th round. The 4 people in the bottom 4 of the overall individual kill score would be eliminated. If Gahan formed a team and obtained double the kill points, no matter how one looked at it, Gahan's first place would be unbreakable. Only by isolating Gahan and preventing him from sharing the points of his teammates could he possibly surpass Yuzhong University's first place. Let the competition begin. As soon as the host gave the order, everyone rushed out like arrows. They tacitly went in different directions to avoid encountering each other during the battle, which would cause some inexplicable conflicts. Gohan chose the west direction alone. The forest in this dungeon was filled with trees that were more than 20 meters tall. The lush branches and leaves covered the sky tightly, and the hot and bright sunlight became dim when it shone under the trees. The time of the dungeon was set at noon, but the entire forest seemed to be at dusk. The range of vision was less than 20 meters, and beyond that, the situation in the distance could no longer be seen clearly. This gave a lurking Yuan Ko a great opportunity. You have obtained 10 points. Your current total points, 10. Gohan didn't even turn his head. He took out his Juzi sword and slashed behind him. A system notification sounded in his ears, and he obtained 10 points just like that. The one who ambushed Gohan was a spotted leopard. Hiding in the darkness of the tree trunk, it was very confident. It felt that as long as it jumped out at lightning speed and used its sharp claws to gently slash Gohan's neck, it could take away Gohan's life. Unfortunately, it didn't know that Gohan had already sensed its existence the moment it took its first breath. This spotted leopard was only a ghost-grade Yuan Ko. Naturally, it couldn't withstand a single slash from a top, famed sword-grade swordmistress. It was directly slashed in half by the Juzi sword and then absorbed by the dimensional vortex. Although the spotted leopard was dead, its death became a signal. Immediately after the spotted leopard, hundreds of spotted leopards suddenly jumped out from various parts of the forest. All of their sharp claws had one target, Gohan's neck. They wanted to cut open Gohan's neck. There was nothing to go into detail about the battle. Not to mention hundreds of spotted leopards. Even if millions of them pounced at him at the same time, Gohan probably wouldn't care. After all, millions of spotted leopards couldn't attack Gohan at the same time. In terms of attack area, at most 6 or 7 spotted leopards could attack Gohan at the same time. This gave Gohan a chance to perform. Every time Gohan's sword flew up and slashed several spotted leopards in half. Then, the dimensional vortex grew larger and larger, continuously absorbing these pitiful spotted leopards' corpses. In less than 10 minutes, hundreds of spotted leopards were all dead, becoming Gohan's points. You have obtained 10 points. Your current total points are 3,250. Gohan stretched his back. He had obtained 3,250 points just like that. The speed wasn't bad. He wondered how many points the others had. According to previous competition practices, this wave of spotted leopards should have been deliberately spawned for the contestants to be at the bottom. That's why the other teams also encountered this wave of spotted leopards. Apart from Liu Ling, there should still be half of the others left. Gohan guessed. It was impossible for the others to have such a terrifying killing speed as Gohan. So what was the truth? On the eastern battlefield, Leslie Dracula and Harry Chong-Rua's team had only killed a little more than 100 spotted leopards. On the other hand, Liu Ling and Passerby B's team had already killed all the spotted leopards just like Gohan. As for Andreevich and Ladia's team, Ladia stared at Andreevich, who was in a frenzy. Electric arcs constantly flashed around them. Unexpectedly, a spotted leopard turned into a corpse in an instant. Andreevich had actually killed all the spotted leopards by himself. Chapter 826. Each contestant didn't know the accumulated points of other contestants, but the audience sitting in the stands and watching the live TV could know the points of other contestants, because a scoreboard had been hung on the TV screen, and the person in first place had 16,272 points. This score was naturally not Gohan's, but Andreevich's. In an hour, he had accumulated almost double the number of points that Gohan had. The person in second place was still not Gohan, but Liu Ling and Passerby B. This team ranked second with 12,230 points, and the third place was Gohan with 9,565 points. This year's competition is really weird. They actually let our Miss Ling in the Moscow round. An audience member said in disbelief. Obviously, she couldn't accept such a result. After losing to their opponent in the third round, which tested the tacit understanding between the sword lady and the swordswoman, unexpectedly, they also lost to the Muscovite in the team competition. It can't be helped. Miss Ling's teammate is too trashy. Another audience member was obviously dissatisfied with Leonian Ling's choice of Passerby B. In the competition just now, Passerby B didn't have any effect at all. His points were less than 1,000, not even a fraction of Miss Ling's points. Yes, in comparison, the Berlin girl is much better. It seems that she also got more than 5,000 points. If we don't talk about the 5,000 points, our Miss Ling is still in first place. The audience immediately echoed. That's right, that's completely the fault of her teammate. Miss Ling is still in first place. All the audience members nodded in agreement, expressing that this was the truth. It wasn't that Miss Ling wasn't strong enough, but that her teammate was too useless. By the way, don't you care about that Gahan? An audience member suddenly asked. What's there to care about? He's just a piece of trash. In a real battle, he will show his true colors. At most, he will be in third place, the surrounding audience said disdainfully. But did you notice that just now, when the camera swept over that Yuzhong person, he didn't seem to move at all? He doesn't seem to be moving at all. The audience member voiced out the doubt in his heart. He paid a lot of attention to Gahan. Otherwise, he would be able to discover such an important thing when the camera swept over Gahan. Is that so? I didn't notice. The other audience members shook their heads in disdain. He's not worth paying attention to. Look, the camera is on Miss Ling again. Let's cheer for Miss Ling. Is that so? Only third place in total points? At this moment, the unnoticed Gahan was leisurely lying on a rock. There was no one beside him, and no one knew who he was talking to. All right. In fact, only Tomono Kakashi could talk to Gahan at this time. All right. I heard that you entered Billy's main battle today. Congratulations. Gohan was the first to congratulate Tomono Kakashi. P.S. First of all, congratulations to my beloved Gina-chan for entering this site. Then, I want to clarify that those who don't play in Billy can ignore this sentence. It won't affect the plot. What do you mean by main battle? Tomono Kakashi muttered. Don't you want to be in first place? Just let your points slide like this. Don't worry, this is a rare opportunity. Let Qi and Juzi practice. Especially Qi. Her swordsmanship is terrible. It's not worthy of her powerful attributes. Gohan said with a bitter smile. He was lying there comfortably, while Qi and Juzi were fighting hard in the forest more than 10 kilometers away. That was why Gohan's points kept rising even though he didn't do anything. In fact, this was the original fighting style of sword wielder. The sword wielder would hide behind the sword wielder and let the sword wielder fight. However, the sword wielder must not be too far away from the sword wielder. Otherwise, if the sword wielder couldn't rush back in time, the sword wielder would be torn to pieces by Yuan Ko. Only a sword wielder could be so willful as to lie there and let the sword wielder fight more than 10 kilometers away like Gahan did. This was because only a sword wielder could lift a sword wielder and fight by himself without revealing any sword marks. Although the boulder that Gahan was lying on was clean, not a single drop of blood could be seen. In fact, there were already at least 50 to 60 Yuanko who had died here, and they were all instantly killed by Guhan's heavenly sword. The reason why he let Juzi and Qi fight so far away was to train Qi swordsmanship. When Qi was King Yu, due to the lack of consciousness fragments, King Yu completely forgot his swordsmanship. Only after being trained by Gahan for a while did he recover some of his swordsmanship memory. However, at that time, Gahan wasn't worried about King Yu's swordsmanship. This was because once King Yu fused with his original body, King Yu would be able to recover all of his swordsmanship. It must be known that King Yu's swordsmanship was one of the best among all the famous sword wielder. However, King Yu became Qi, so there was no sword wielder for him to fuse with. Qi was like a newborn child who could only accumulate his swordsmanship bit by bit. At that moment, what Qi needed the most was a large number of Yuan Ko for Qi to practice with. However, finding a large number of Yuan Ko for Qi to practice with was easier said than done. It was naturally impossible in real life. Gahan couldn't leave Yinjing City for the time being, so he could only rely on the game. Coincidentally, he encountered a trial to kill Yuan Ko, so Gahan naturally thought of letting Qidian train himself. The reason why Gahan was talking to Tomono Kakaze was because Gahan was asking Tomono Kakaze to do him a favor. Because Gahan knew that all the matches were being broadcasted to the audience in front of the TV. However, due to technical issues, the broadcasting was handled by Tomono Kakaze, the game's core AI. In other words, what the audience could see depended on the camera under Tomono Kakaze's control. Therefore, Gahan secretly begged Tomono Kakaze to reduce the number of scenes related to him and increase the number of scenes related to the others. Anyway, the people of Yinjing loved watching their Liu Ling fight, so they naturally weren't curious about the hated Yuzhong guy. This wasn't a difficult task for Tomono Kakaze, so she easily accomplished it. Therefore, in the hour-long battle, Gahan scenes were only shown for less than 3 minutes. However, just as Gahan predicted, the audience in Yinjing City didn't notice anything strange. Another hour. Gahan looked at the difference in points and smiled at Tomono Kakaze. It won't be a problem to catch up in an hour. An hour's time? After an hour, the difference between you and the first place will increase to about 18,000 points. Are you sure you can catch up to 18,000 points in an hour? Tomono Kakaze asked with uncertainty. All right, don't expect me to open the back door for you. I can't change Yuan Ko's attributes. Otherwise, Xian will lock me up immediately. I don't need you to help me change Yuan Ko's attributes. That isn't my style, Gahan's. All I need is for you to tell me which area has the highest concentration of high-ranking generals. A meteor rank Yuan bandit is worth 3,000 points. As long as I kill 6 meteor rank Yuan bandits, won't my 18,000 points catch up? That's true. If you have your new Blade Master. Tomono Kakaze didn't continue. Thinking about the new famed Sword Blade Master Qidian that Gahan obtained, Tomono Kakaze couldn't help but feel a chill. After discovering the Juzi sword, Tomono Kakaze was shocked by its attributes. Then, she started to wonder who should be first between the Juzi sword and the 3-foot sword. But now, Tomono Kakaze didn't have to wonder anymore. Ever since the Qidian sword appeared, the first place was indisputably on the head of the Qidian sword. Qidian sword, material, Emperor Aliorigin, innate unknown, unique, realm, famed sword grade, rank, 9 sword. Characteristic 1. The Qidian sword has the ability to continue to upgrade itself. After meeting certain conditions, it can upgrade to Emperor Sword Blade Master. Characteristic 2. The Qidian sword can only be owned by the sword wielder, military governor. Others can't synchronize with the Qidian sword. Awakening, awakened. Form, sword form. Sword wielder, military governor. Deep sword mark, not deep. Damage, Blade Master Form 2. 85/Sword Form 3. 85 Defense, Blade Master Form 2. 88/Sword Form 2. 88 Agility, Blade Master Form 0. 91/Sword Form 1. 41 Protective Shield, Resetting Time, 600 seconds. Durability, 100% synchronization and coordination, sword element requirement. 10,000 synchronization and coordination time, 10 minutes. Initial sword mark engraving. After the initial engraving of the sword mark, the sword wielder's sword element points will be increased by 10,000 points. Sword mark contract. After synchronization, the Qidian sword will have the ability to trigger the dimensional vortex. As long as it attacks the opponent's dimensional energy node, it can open the dimensional vortex and send the opponent back into the dimensional vortex. Basic skill, Node of All. After use, the Qidian sword will have the ability to see the opponent's dimensional energy node. Lasts for 20 seconds. Cooldown of 1 minute. Passive skill, Node of All. Attacks have a chance to rejuvenate the opponent, causing the opponent to return to a child state. The chance depends on the opponent's ability, ranging from 1% to 90%. Lasts for 10 seconds. Advanced skill, Genesis of All. Copies all life forms within a 100-meter radius. The copied life forms will have different percentages of Qidian strength. Cooldown of 5 minutes. Ultimate skill, Qidian God. After use, the Qidian sword will have the ability to become a god. It can deify the target within the range and increase one of its attributes by 100 times. Lasts for 15 seconds. Cooldown of 10 minutes. Sword mark restraint, twin Juzi. When fighting with the Juzi sword or under the same sword wielder, both sides' attributes will be increased by 100%. Turn enemy into friend. When fighting with the past water sword or under the same sword wielder, all of the enemy's attributes will be decreased by 100%. Double Emperors in the air. After the Qidian sword evolved into an Emperor sword, it will be unsealed. When wielding the Xianyuan sword, both sides' skills will be increased by 400%. For example, when Qidian and Juzi fought together, both of their attributes increased by 100% at the same time. In terms of attributes, they had truly reached the strength of a spirit sword-level sword wielder. Of course, because Gohan's sword essence was still about half as strong as the lowest level spirit sword-level sword wielder, when it came to a real battle, there was still a gap between him and the sword lady of the spirit sword level on paper. However, all the above points added together could not compare to the starting point. The peculiarity of its characteristics. First of all, there are these 2 question marks. It seemed that even Tomono Kakaze could not figure out the attributes of Qidian's sword, so she could only use these 2 question marks to express it. According to the information that Gohan had personally asked Tomono Kakaze suspected that Qidian might belong to a brand new kendo that had never been discovered by humans. Therefore, she could not name this kendo at all. However, Tomono Kakaze suggested to Gohan to let Gohan apply to the Sword Committee for a more detailed appraisal of Qidian's sword, so that they could get the attributes of Qidian's sword more accurately. In this regard, Gohan expressed a very clear refusal and sincerely begged Tomono Kakaze to keep the attributes of Qidian's sword appraisal strictly confidential and not to upload them to the Sword Committee. In this regard, Tomono Kakaze could only say very apologetically that every year, the people in the management office would forcibly extract all the data in the game for testing. So at most 1 year later, Qidian's sword's attributes would be exposed. And once Qidian's sword's attributes were exposed, the fact that Tomono Kakaze deliberately concealed Qidian's sword's attributes would also be exposed, and then Tomono Kakaze would be in a very dangerous state. But fortunately, because the appraisal of Qidian's sword was done in this temporarily established dungeon, Tomono Kakaze could only apologize. This temporarily established dungeon was completely constructed by Tomono Kakaze, and Tomono Kakaze had 100% power here. When the dungeon ended, Tomono Kakaze would also clear all the data of this dungeon to 0. As long as Tomono Kakaze fused Qidian's sword's data with the dungeon's data and cleared it together, no one would suspect anything. But this was only limited to this temporarily established dungeon. Tomono Kakaze very clearly warned Gohan that he must not allow Qidian's sword to officially enter the world of Sword Maiden Online, or else Tomono Kakaze would have to report the data of Qidian's Sword Committee to the Sword Committee. After listening to Tomono Kakaze's words, Gohan felt very lucky that he did not enter the game after returning to Yanjing City. But to be honest, if it wasn't for Jinsu Oral Solution and I Ching's hidden foreshadowing, then Sword Maiden Online really wouldn't be that attractive to Gohan, unlike at the beginning, when it was the game that brought new hope to Gohan. Back to the issue of the inexplicable characteristics of Qidian's sword. Other than the 2 question marks, Qidian's sword actually had 2 sword principal characteristics. This was a special honor that only Emperor swords and Fairy swords could have, because only Emperor swords and Fairy swords could have 2 sword principal characteristics. If there were other sword maidens who were the same as Qidian in terms of dual characteristics, then the specific contents of these 2 characteristics were unparalleled in the world and could only be found in Qidian. First of the characteristics, Qidian's sword actually had the ability to evolve from a famous sword-level sword maiden to an Emperor sword-level sword maiden. Just by thinking about it, one would know that this was a very terrifying thing. This was because Qi Dian sword occupied Guhan's famous sword-level sword mark. If after Guhan became an Emperor sword-level sword wielder, Qi Dian's sword would evolve into an Emperor sword-level sword maiden. Wouldn't that mean that Guhan could have two Emperor sword-level sword maidens at the same time? This could be seen from the third sword scar at the starting point. The sword scar fetters, which was called Twin Emperors in the Sky, was written strangely. Normally, sword scar fetters would say, when fighting with a certain sword lady or when fighting with the same sword wielder, a certain attribute would be increased. This meant that as long as the other sword wielder who was fighting with the sword wielder had a sword maiden that was required for the sword mark fetter, then the sword mark fetter would also be successful. However, the attribute of double emperors in the sky was written like this. This sword mark fetter could only be triggered when it belonged to the same sword wielder as the Xianyuan sword. This meant that in order to trigger this fetter, Guhan had to have the Emperor sword-level Xianyuan sword himself. Moreover, the prerequisite was that Qi Dian's sword had to evolve into an Emperor sword-level sword maiden. This clearly meant that Guhan could have the Emperor's sword form Qi Dian's sword and the Xianyuan sword at the same time. Guhan could indeed become a man who could have two Emperor's sword-level swords at the same time. In this way, apart from Kanzu, there was probably no other Emperor sword-level power that could suppress Guhan. And once Guhan grew into an Emperor sword-level sword wielder, all of Yuan Ko's nightmares would appear, and the most powerful period of mankind would also come. From this point of view, even if the world's #1 sword maiden was placed on Qi Dian's sword's head, it was also a matter of course. If the first characteristic was the characteristic that made Qi Dian sword the world's #1 sword maiden, then the second characteristic of Qi Dian's sword was the characteristic that made Qi Dian's sword fall into the mortal world. Only Guhan could synchronize and coordinate it. When Guhan was alive, Qi Dian's sword was the world's #1 sword maiden. However, once Guhan ascended, Qi Dian's sword would probably become the world's most expensive piece of trash and could only be placed in the Guhan Jindi Museum for future generations to admire. What should I do? If I die, you'll fall into a deep sleep forever. An hour ago, after Guhan had seen Qi Dian's sword's attributes clearly, he had asked Qi Dian's sword this question. I'll ascend with you. If God doesn't allow it, then I'll go by myself, was Qi Dian's sword's answer, and the determination it displayed made Guhan's heart tremble. From what Qi Dian's sword had said, if he was going to die, then she would break herself and follow Guhan. Why bother? The heaven-reliant sword in Guhan's hand stabbed to the left, and an assassin wearing black knight clothes with a dagger in his hand suddenly appeared in the empty space. This assassin was Yuan Ko's assassin, organized by the old man in the mountain. He used invisibility to launch a sneak attack on the swordsman. Unfortunately, his footsteps were not light enough, and Guhan saw through his trick and killed him with a single slash. After killing the assassin, Guhan looked at the time again. There was only 1 hour and 10 minutes left until the end of the competition. It's time to meet up with Qi Dian's sword and the others. Guhan climbed up from the rock and slowly walked toward the depths of the forest where Qi Dian's sword and Juzi were. All right, the competition will end in an hour. Now, our Miss Ling is far ahead and has basically secured her victory. Let's congratulate Miss Ling. In a live broadcast of the television station, the host no longer cared about being impartial and objective. He directly started to celebrate Liuyan Ling's victory. This was because Liuyan Ling, who had been trailing behind Andreevich an hour ago, had completely overtaken Andreevich. Her points had reached a terrifying 58,650 points, and she was almost 18,000 points ahead of Andreevich. The reason for this was that Liuyan Ling, who had been using the 3-foot sword normally in the previous hour, had finally used the 100 million sword technique when she was surrounded by a large group of Nether Yuan Ko. In just 5 minutes, she had killed all the Nether Yuan Ko, and her points had increased by 25,000. She had overtaken Andreevich. However, the host did not seem to notice that the points of Guhan, who was in third place, suddenly jumped from his original 19,840 points to 22,840 points, increasing by 3,000 points in one go. Chapter 828. Qi Jian has improved a lot. When Gohan rushed to the battlefield where Juzi and Qi Jian were fighting, he was pleasantly surprised to find that Qi Jian's swordsmanship had improved significantly. Although it had been trained by Gohan, it had to be admitted that Qi Jian's swordsmanship was still a little rigid. It was inflexible and didn't have its own comprehension. To put it simply, Gohan taught Qi Jian how to practice, and Qi Jian rarely added his own ideas. However, at that moment, Gohan could see many things that belonged to Qi Jian from its swordsmanship. This meant that Qi Jian was improving, and the improvement was huge. It was like sitting in an F1 car. In just 2 hours, Qi Jian had made progress that was equivalent to 3 months of Gohan's. Could it be that after changing bodies, Qi Jian's swordsmanship talent improved as well? Gohan guessed inwardly. Or perhaps it's because of its soul. Qi Jian was only a consciousness fragment previously, and it had deliberately concealed all memories related to swordsmanship. Therefore, it's reasonable that its swordsmanship cultivation speed wasn't fast. But now that Qi Jian's soul has been completely restored, its swordsman-related talent has returned. While Gohan was thinking about this, Qi Jian had already killed a dragon-grade Yuan Ko. This dragon-level Yuan bandit was considered an above-average opponent among all the dragon-level Yuan bandit. An ordinary famous sword-level sword mistress would need around 10 minutes to kill this dragon-level Yuan bandit if their attributes were not countered. But now, Qi Jian had only used 5 sword strikes to kill his opponent. However, there were still some shortcomings. Gohan's order was for Qi Jian to directly attack the opponent's dimensional node as much as possible. That way, it could directly open a dimensional vortex and send the opponent home with 1 strike. Unfortunately, the dimensional node was too small. The dragon-grade Yuan Ko's dimensional node was only about the size of a fingernail. Even if Yuan Ko stood there motionlessly, it would still be difficult for him to attack with his sword in 1 go. Not to mention that Yuan Ko was moving at a high speed. Although Yuan Ko's talent was amazing, it would still take a certain amount of time to reach this level. Juzi, Qi Jian, stop. There was still an hour left, and Gohan did not dare to continue wasting time. He began to order Juzi and Qi Jian to return to the sword, and then he took action himself to catch up with the points he was lagging behind. Yes, master. Juzi once again displayed her cleverness and obedience. Even though she was fighting against a Yuan Ko, after receiving Gohan's order, Juzi immediately stopped swinging her sword and stood motionless. She didn't care even if Yuan Ko attacked her several times for no reason. Come back. With a wave of Gohan's hand, Juzi turned into a stream of light and returned to his hand. Yuan Ko, who was attacking Juzi, realized that Juzi had suddenly disappeared and immediately pounced at Gohan angrily. Gohan casually swung his sword and sent Yuan Ko back into the dimensional vortex. Compared to Juzi's cleverness, Qi Jian continued the unique characteristics of the king of Chu, which was disobedience. She had always been unwilling to carry out Gohan's orders resolutely. Even if she was willing to carry it out, she would delay it for a while before carrying it out. Otherwise, how could she show that she was Gohan's most important sword maiden? This time, Qi Jian probably really didn't want to carry out Gohan's orders, or it could be said that she wanted to carry out Gohan's orders too much. No, I must hit Yuan Ko's node. This is also your order, isn't it? Qi Jian's stubborn temper flared up again. She expressed that she must hit the opponent's node once, and send him back to his home through the dimensional vortex. I'll only give you 5 minutes. If you can't do it in 5 minutes, I'll force you to return to your sword. It had to be said that Gohan's personality had indeed changed a lot. Otherwise, why would he give Qi Jian 5 minutes and force her to return her sword? Qi Jian didn't say anything and started shooting out flames. Looking at the unintelligent Yuan Ko, he couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. It was as if he wasn't Yuan Ko and Qi Jian was the real Yuan Ko. However, there was a saying in this world, more haste, less speed. The more Qi Jian wanted to do something, the worse it got. Although Qi Jian used more strength to kill, her swordsmanship lost its order. Not only did she not hit the enemy's node, her killing efficiency decreased and was not even as efficient as before. Damn it! Qi Jian gritted her teeth and cut off the head of a flood dragon, Yuan Ko, beside her. At this moment, a crazy roar came from the forest in the distance. Then, a dinosaur that was as tall as a 3-story building jumped out. The most eye-catching thing about this dinosaur was its huge head and terrifyingly sharp teeth. The strong muscles on both sides of its lips proved that this dinosaur had an amazing bite force. At the same time, it had a pair of extremely powerful tails. Along the way, Guhan saw with his own eyes that 5 to 6 trees were directly snapped in half by its tail. If one was hit by this tail, one's bones would probably be crushed in an instant. However, this dinosaur walked on 2 feet. Although it had a pair of forelimbs, they were very small. They were only the size of an adult's arm. It didn't seem to have any combat power. It seemed to be just balancing its body's center of gravity. This is a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Guhan recognized Yuan Ko's information. This was a Tyrannosaurus Rex that belonged to the Western Beast Camp. Although Tyrannosaurus Rex was classified as a Western Beast Camp, according to the information found in some dinosaur museums, Tyrannosaurus Rex actually had nothing to do with Western Beast Camp. The Tyrannosaurus Rex actually had nothing to do with Western magical beasts, nor was it something that existed in people's imagination. Rather, it was a prehistoric creature native to Earth. Putting them in a Western camp was just a convenient way for humans to put them there. There was a period of time when a large number of Yuan Ko dinosaurs appeared on Earth. Unfortunately, these dinosaurs didn't belong to Yuan Ko forces and were not very smart, so they were quickly killed by humans and other Yuan Ko dinosaurs. It was said that only the Wulong region of Sichuan still had a certain number of dinosaurs. Dinosaur Yuan Ko dinosaurs could no longer be found in other places. The most powerful dinosaurs could reach the level of U-level Yuan Ko, and this Tyrannosaurus Rex belonged to the meteor-level Yuan Ko, which was second only to the U-level Yuan Ko. After being strengthened by dimensional energy, the Tyrannosaurus Rex's skin had a powerful defensive ability comparable to that of an armored protective steel plate. At the same time, its bite force reached a terrifying 1,000 tons. It could easily bite a 10-meter-thick steel bar into 2 pieces. Therefore, the personal terminals advised to the sword holder clearly stated that they must be absolutely careful of the Tyrannosaurus Rex's mouth, because once bitten, even the personal shield of a spirit sword maiden would shatter in an instant, let alone a fragile human body. Just in time, seeing the Tyrannosaurus Rex appear, Qi Jian's eyes showed a surprised expression, because compared to other Yuan Ko dinosaurs, the Tyrannosaurus Rex's body was larger, so its dimensional node was also larger. The other Yuan Ko's node was 1/10 of a fingernail, but the Tyrannosaurus Rex's node was 2 fingernails. This made Qi Jian full of confidence that it could hit this node. Therefore, Qi Jian rushed towards the Tyrannosaurus Rex. King Yu, come back. This Tyrannosaurus Rex is not something you can deal with. In a moment of desperation, Guhan actually shouted the name of the former King Yu. However, what Guhan didn't expect was that the 2 words King Yu seemed to evoke Qi Jian's dissatisfaction, so she rushed forward even more. I see it. Qi Jian tightened its grip on the Qi Jian sword and directly stabbed at the Tyrannosaurus Rex's lower jaw, because the Tyrannosaurus Rex's dimensional node was at the lower jaw. This was a very good position to attack, because it was at the very front of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It was not hidden under its belly, nor was it hidden on the Tyrannosaurus Rex's back. Therefore, Qi Jian could accurately attack this node from a very good angle without even needing to turn. But at the same time, this also brought about a huge risk. In Qi Jian's eyes, the Tyrannosaurus Rex's node was right in front of it, and it was an easy target. In the Tyrannosaurus Rex's eyes, this human seemed to be out of her mind. She actually rushed towards its mouth. As long as it opened its mouth, it would easily bite Qi Jian into its mouth, and then use its amazing bite force to tear the other party into pieces. That was what the Tyrannosaurus Rex thought and did. In terms of distance, because the Chidian sword had a certain length, as long as Chidian could attack the Tyrannosaurus Rex's node immediately, the Tyrannosaurus Rex's dimensional vortex would be opened, and it would be useless for the Tyrannosaurus Rex to bite Chidian. Therefore, Chidian still had a chance of winning as long as the first weapon could hit the 2-fingernail-sized node. But unfortunately, at the most critical moment, Chidian's hand trembled slightly. This slight tremble was usually not a big deal, and it would only break 2 cups in the sky. But at this critical moment of life and death, this tremble brought about a huge change. The tip of the Chidian sword brushed past the Tyrannosaurus Rex's node. When Chidian was ready to pull back and stab again, she already had no chance. The Tyrannosaurus Rex opened its bloody mouth and instantly bit the waist of Chidian, who didn't dodge at all, and held her whole body in its mouth. Then, the Tyrannosaurus Rex's upper and lower jaws exerted force at the same time, and Chidian's seemingly indestructible personal shield was shattered in just a moment. The information on the personal terminal clearly stated that the Tyrannosaurus Rex's bite force should never be underestimated. That was a power that even a spiritual level sword maiden's personal shield couldn't resist. Although the Chidian sword's protection was the same as a normal spiritual level sword maiden, and because it fought together with Juzi, all its attributes were increased by 100%. But the problem was that Guhan's sword essence was less than half of a spiritual level sword maiden's. In this way, the two offset each other, and Chidian's personal shield at this time was just a normal spiritual level sword maiden's personal shield. Then the ending was obvious. The first bite, Chidian's personal shield was directly shattered. The second bite, Chidian's body would probably be directly bitten to pieces. Chapter 829. It wasn't until the T-Rex's breath, filled with the stench of blood, blew into Chidian's nose did it realize that things were completely different from what it had imagined. In an instant, it had fallen into the most dangerous situation. At this moment, the T-Rex opened its jaws again and bit down at lightning speed, intending to deal a fatal blow to the second player. Guhan, save me. At this critical moment, Chidian's weakness as a woman was completely revealed. Well, in fact, even if it was a man, he would probably cry for help at this moment. Oh, Chidian clearly felt 7 or 8 sharp teeth piercing its body. Just as these teeth were about to crush its bones, the T-Rex suddenly let out a painful howl, then took a few steps back and spat out Chidian. Guhan! Chidian struggled to raise its head from the ground and saw Guhan holding the Juzi sword. The tip of the sword pierced through the T-Rex's lower jaw and deep into the T-Rex's throat. No wonder the T-Rex would let out a painful howl and then spit out Chidian that was already in its mouth. Oh! The T-Rex frantically shook its head, wanting to throw Guhan and the Juzi sword out. The T-Rex indeed achieved its goal. Guhan flew out with the Juzi sword. However, Guhan did not fall to the ground. Instead, he made a beautiful turn in the air and landed on the trunk of a nearby tree. Come back. Guhan stretched out his hand, and Chidian turned into a stream of light and returned to Guhan's hand, turning back into the Juzi sword. Guhan carefully looked at Chidian's data and discovered that although Chidian's personal shield had been destroyed, the damage to its durability was not high. It only lost about 10% of its original durability. This surprised Guhan. The Sword Maiden's durability was only 1/4 of the damage it could withstand. Meanwhile, the Tyrannosaurus Rex was able to shatter Chidian's shield with a single bite. Logically speaking, it should be able to reduce Chidian's durability to 1% with a single bite. However, Starting Point had only lost less than 10% of its durability. It seemed like Starting Point's durability was even higher than personal shields. However, thinking about it carefully, when forging Starting Point, he had added a total of 3 God-level materials. It seemed like it was normal for its durability to be higher. After all, Starting Point had the potential to become an Emperor's Sword. Guhan wanted to carefully study the issue of Chidian's durability, but this T-Rex did not intend to give Guhan such a chance. With blood gushing out of its throat, it charged towards the towering tree that Guhan was standing on like a tank. Then its entire body slammed into the tree, forcefully knocking the tree down along with its roots. The tree was so thick that it would take 3 people to wrap their arms around it. Chance! It was also at this moment that Guhan noticed that the Tyrannosaurus Rex's head paused for a moment when it hit the tree trunk. This was probably because the Tyrannosaurus Rex's head was also a little dizzy from the impact. In fact, this pause was not long, about 0.5 seconds. However, 0.5 seconds was enough. The moment the tree was knocked down, Guhan leaped down like a bullet. The blade of the Chidian drew a beautiful arc beside the T-Rex's chin. Then, a dimensional vortex appeared beside the Tyrannosaurus Rex, sucking in the lively Tyrannosaurus Rex, who had not suffered much damage, back into its original world. It was also at this moment that Guhan's points jumped, increasing by a whole 3,000 points. Amazing! Even Guhan, who had expected this scene, couldn't help but be dumbfounded when he saw the T-Rex, which was almost at full HP, being sucked back by the dimensional vortex. This was a Meteor Yuan Ko with full HP, but it was returned to the dimensional vortex just because Guhan grasped its fatal flaw. If the opponent with a universe-level Yuan Ko, although with the combat ability of a universe-level Yuan Ko, it would be impossible for a famed sword-level Guhan to touch his node when a universe-level Yuan Ko was fully focused on protecting his node. However, the problem was that a universe-level Yuan Ko didn't know how to protect his node. In fact, Yuan Ko didn't even know the existence of his node. It could be guaranteed that a high-level Yuan Ko wouldn't deliberately protect his node during a battle. This gave Guhan a great opportunity. As long as a universe-level Yuan Ko didn't protect his node, Guhan was confident that he could hit his node. This way, even if a universe-level Yuan Ko was at full HP, he would still have to return to the dimensional vortex and say goodbye to this world. Universe-level Yuan Ko. Guhan suddenly sneered. Should I take the initiative to play with them? With this thought, Guhan couldn't wait to find a universe-level Yuan Ko to test his idea. He wanted to see if he could launch a fatal sneak attack against a universe-level Yuan Ko who didn't know how to defend his node. He wanted to use the power of a famed sword-level sword wielder to send a powerful universe-level Yuan Ko on his way. Unfortunately, in this temporary instance created by Tamono Kakashi, the highest-level Yuan Ko was only a meteor-level Yuan Ko. A universe-level Yuan Ko didn't exist. Jina-chan, can you tell me where the nearest meteor-level Yuan Ko gathering point is? Since he couldn't use a universe-level Yuan Ko to practice, Guhan could only settle for the next best thing, which was to find a meteor-level Yuan Ko. There's a group of 9 Tyrannosaurus Rex 23 kilometers southwest of you. Takana Kakashi replied in a straightforward manner. So cool. Our Lord Ling's points have already exceeded 65,000, and she's still far ahead. The host was explaining in high spirits, and the camera was facing Liuyan Ling. Liuyan Ling was floating in the air with her eyes closed, and her palms were gently pressed down. Beside Liuyan Ling, there were thin and sharp lights that were like strands of hair. The rays of light were like swords, and they hovered silently around Ling, fleeting time. On the battlefield in the distance, there were thousands of light swords flying up and down, and in the middle of these light swords, there was a group of demonic armored pigs that had fallen into despair. Although these demonic armored pigs were all dragon-level Yuan Ko, from their names, one could tell that their main combat power came from their armor. They sacrificed their attack power in exchange for a stronger defense. The armor on their skin could reach the defense of a nether-level Yuan Ko after they were infused with magic. Many famed sword-level swordbearers would not be able to deplete more than half of their HP after fighting the demonic armored pigs for half an hour. Therefore, the demonic armored pigs were considered to be extremely terrible Yuan Ko in the swordbearers' memos. Although these demonic armored pigs were unlikely to kill them, the long process of killing them was enough to make most famed sword-level swordbearers give up on the idea of fighting them. They would rather fight with Yuan Ko, whose attack power was 2 or even 5 times stronger than theirs, then waste time with the demonic armored pigs. But now this group of more than 30 demonic armored pigs were squeezed together helplessly like babies. Their eyes were filled with fear, and the armor on their bodies was emitting an extreme black light. This meant that these demonic armored pigs had already infused all their magic into their skin, and at the same time, they had activated the defense of their armor to its greatest state. But even so, these armor could not defend against the attacks of the light swords floating in the air. The moment these light swords pierced into the demonic armored pig's skin, they sank deep into the demonic armored pig's bodies. The demonic armored pig that was struck by the light swords seemed to have been scalded by a soldering iron. It began to jump around crazily, its eyes filled with pain and despair. It was as if its entire body was being burned. Once the demonic iron-armored pig broke away from the protection of the herd of pigs due to the pain, the remaining light spots floating in the air would immediately pierce into the demonic iron-armored pig's body. According to the audience's careful calculations, it would only take about 32 light swords to kill a demonic iron-armored pig with astonishing defense. In 10 minutes, the light swords near the demonic armored pigs were completely depleted, and the herd of demonic armored pigs had also disappeared without a trace, absorbed by the dimensional vortex. In these short 10 minutes, Liu Yunling's points had increased by 9,000 points, reaching a terrifying 74,000 points. However, it was clear that this kind of consumption was also very taxing on Liu Yunling. When she landed from the air, her forehead was already covered in dense beads of sweat. Her wrist was also trembling slightly, and her face was a little pale. It was clear that the 300 light swords had consumed a lot of Liu Yunling's energy. When the Liu family's ultimate technique, the 100 million sword technique, was cultivated to the Emperor's sword level, it could release 100 million such sword lights at the same time. There was no need for more than 100 million sword lights. Just 10 million sword lights was enough for a flood-level Yuan Ko to return to the dimensional vortex. However, the current limit that Liu Yunling could use was about 10,000 sword lights. She had used 1,000 sword lights to kill the demonic pigs, and she had used more than 3,000 sword lights to kill the nether-level Yuan Ko. In addition to some other random Yuan Ko attacks, Liu Yunling had already used up more than 6,000 sword lights. This was equivalent to using up 60% of the sword essence in Liu Yunling's body. It was not strange for Liu Yunling to show such exhaustion. It seems like our Miss Ling is a little tired. However, this is not important. Andreevich, who is in second place, has less than 60,000 points, and there are only 20 minutes left. Miss Ling has already secured victory. Miss Ling will definitely win. Miss Ling. However, this host did not notice that the director below the stage was constantly gesturing for him to shut up. In the end, it was the assistant director who rushed to his side at the last minute and whispered in his ear, "Wrong. The second place is not Andreevich." "Not him? Then who is it?" the host asked in a daze. "It's that Yuzhong person, Gahan." Chapter 830. While everyone's attention was focused on Liu Yunling's performance of the Billion Swords technique, Gohan's points had quietly surpassed Andreevich, who was in second place. When all the demonic armored pigs were killed, Gohan's total points had reached 65,800. He was only less than 9,000 points away from Liu Yunling's 75,000 points. He was also 5,000 points away from Andreevich, who was in second place. No one knew how Gahan did it. When they heard the host reveal Gahan's current points in astonishment, they suddenly realized that the second place had changed from Andreevich to Gahan. However, some of the audience remembered that 40 minutes ago, which was an hour before the end of the competition, Gahan's points were clearly only 22840. He had only obtained 11,000 points in an hour. It might be an impressive number compared to the average famed swordsman, but it was a far cry from Liu Yunling's 58,000 points. However, Gahan had caught up to 65,800 points. It was equivalent to obtaining more than 43,000 points in 40 minutes. It was almost the same as Leonian Ling's 2-hour score. How did Gahan do it? How did he do it? What did this Yuzhong guy do? Everyone was asking this question, but no one could get an answer. Moreover, during the 3 minutes the question was asked, Gahan's points were still rising. He had reached 67,000 points. In these 3 minutes, Gahan had gained 1,200 points. It was equivalent to killing 4 dragon-level Yuan Ko. Oh no, will Miss Ling be caught? Someone in the audience immediately asked. This question resonated with the crowd. Don't worry, she'll be fine. Someone in the audience immediately comforted them. Then, they began to make scientific calculations. This Yuzhong guy got 1,200 points in 3 minutes. He will only get 8,000 points in 20 minutes. He will only get 75,000 points in total. It's just the same as Miss Ling's current points. After 20 minutes, Miss Ling's points will definitely exceed 80,000 points. Miss Ling will definitely win. The audience was comforted by this person's words. Unfortunately, this comfort lasted for less than a minute before it was immediately slapped in the face. Because in the next minute, Guhan's points directly jumped from 67,000 to 69,000, which was equivalent to killing 2 nether-rank Yuan bandits in a minute. If it continued to increase at this rate, their Miss Lin Lin would be sent flying. Cheating. He must be cheating. That Yuzhong dude must be cheating. Thus, the entire audience was stirred up in an instant. They all expressed that it was impossible for a normal person to achieve such a speed. This Gahan must have cheated. He must have won through some special bug. Unfortunately, the audience couldn't see Gahan's battle. If they couldn't see Gahan's battle, they wouldn't be able to find evidence of Gahan's cheating. Therefore, some of the audience changed their target and began to shout, "We want to see Gahan. We want to see Gahan's battle. Hurry up and show us Gahan's battle." This was the first time that the audience requested to see Gahan's battle. Hearing the audience's request, the members of the organizing committee in the VIP stand couldn't help but whisper. They also realized that something was wrong. In the 2-hour battle broadcast, there were pitifully few scenes of Gahan's battle. Therefore, the organizing committee members immediately conveyed their opinions to Tamono Kakazi. Then, Tamono Kakazi found Gahan in battle and said to him helplessly, "Can you restrain yourself a little? I'm going to point the camera at you soon. You won't be able to hide it anymore." "How many minutes do I have?" asked Gahan, who was in the midst of a crazy battle. As the Qijian slashed the node of a triceratops, the nether-rank Yuan Ko, with full HP, was sent back into the dimensional vortex. "I have at most 30 seconds before I turn the broadcast to you," Tamono Kakazi said, and then she hung up the call. "What a pity. It's my first time fighting so comfortably." Gahan directly slashed the node of a triceratops and sent it back into the dimensional vortex. After that, there wasn't a single dinosaur left in the area. Gahan had to find another place to continue farming monsters. Therefore, when the broadcast camera turned to Gahan, Gahan was running leisurely in the forest, which shocked all the audience. Could it be that Gahan had been running all this time? Then where did his points come from? However, the audience soon found it strange because countless arrows suddenly emerged from the depths of the forest and enveloped Gahan. As long as the sword rain could hit 10%, Gahan would immediately be shot into a sieve. Of course, this seemingly lethal rain of arrows did not pose much of a threat to the Salahan. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, Sword of the Abyss. A few sword auras of Sword of the Abyss cut all the arrows flying at him in half, forcibly opening a path for Gahan to move forward. Because it took a long time to draw the bow, after the first wave of arrows disappeared, the second wave of arrows needed a certain amount of time to prepare. This gap gave Gahan the last chance. Taking advantage of this gap, Gahan directly stepped on the tree trunk and rushed into the lush bushes like the wind. His speed was so fast that even the camera in charge of tracking Gahan could not keep up. When the camera finally found Gahan again, there were already more than a dozen corpses lying around her. These corpses were all wearing turquoise clothes that seemed to be made of leaves. Their ears were pointed like gourds, and each of them was very handsome. Their skin was very smooth and delicate. Not even a single spot could be seen. These are all elven sharpshooters. Many of the audience recognized the origin of Yuan Ko. After all, the elven sharpshooters were very famous among the Yuan Ko. Because of their handsome appearance, even though these Yuan Ko were the enemies of humans, humans still liked them very much. It was just like before the apocalypse, when some idiotic fans clearly knew how terrible Korea was to China, but they still liked to flatter the stinky feet of those Korean celebrities, wanting to lick them with their tongues. It was almost the same logic. Elven Sharpshooter, Flood Dragon, level Yuan Ko, 100 points each. This Yuzhong guy has already scored 1,200 points in less than a minute. He now has 68,200 points. Someone immediately calculated Gohan's points. Not only that, look at the rain of arrows just now. It took at least 100 elven sharpshooters to trigger. There are at least 100 elven sharpshooters nearby. Another audience member said, and his words were quickly verified. After Gohan cleared the canopy of a tree, he immediately leaped into another canopy. With a flash of his sword, the elven sharpshooters hiding in the canopy were all killed. From the footage of the corpses, it could be seen that all the elves had died with their throats slit. Apart from a single cut on their throats, there were no other wounds on their bodies. This meant that Gohan's attacks were all one-hit kills. He definitely did not use a second slash. In less than 10 minutes, over 100 elven sharpshooters hiding in the canopy were all killed by Gohan. Gohan's points had increased by 13,200, reaching a terrifying 79,200 points. Miss Ling, how many points does Miss Ling have now? A member of the audience asked anxiously. Even though Ling's points were written at the bottom of the screen, he could not help but ask his friend who was sitting next to him. Miss Ling's points are increasing very quickly. Miss Ling's points are now 83800. She's ahead of this Yuzhong guy by 4,000 points, his friend immediately replied. Time? How much time is left? 5 minutes. Only 5 minutes left. As long as she can hold on for another 5 minutes, it will be enough. 5 minutes. For 1,000 points. I wonder if Miss Ling can hold on for another 5 minutes. The audience members said worriedly. Don't worry. Look at the mini-map on the screen. There are only 3 red dots around this Yuzhong guy, and the other red dots are still 2 or 3 minutes away. The red dots that are further away are 2 to 3 minutes away. Unless all 3 red dots are meteor rank Yuan bandits, Miss Lin Lin will definitely win, the audience said excitedly. The mini-map was a map that only the audience members could see. In the eyes of the players, there was no such thing as a mini-map. The red dots on the mini-map were naturally the surrounding Yuan Kos. From the audience members' words, it could be heard that there were only 3 Yuan Kos left around Gohan. Unfortunately, the mini-map did not indicate Yuan Ko's level. Therefore, the audience members could only secretly hope that these 3 Yuan Kos weren't meteor-level Yuan Kos. This way, Gohan's points would at most be 3,000, and Liu Yinling's first place would be guaranteed. Finally, these 3 red dots gradually approached Gohan and finally revealed their true appearance. What the F*** CK? Every Yinjing audience member had the same thought. The Yuan Ko that appeared in front of them was actually 3 high elven priestesses. Normally, the audience members would find these high elven priestesses very pleasing to the eye. This was because these high elven priestesses were not only beautiful, but more importantly, they didn't wear clothes. That's right, to the elves who worshipped nature the most. The high elven priestess was a holy profession that needed to be one with nature. Naturally, they had to use the most intimate way to feel nature. Even clothes made of tree leaves were something that hindered the power of the high elven priestesses. That was why the 3 elven high priestesses were all naked. Furthermore, the elves were famous for their good figures. Due to the fact that they only ate plants and spent most of their time in the forest, their buttocks and breasts were all perky and perky. Especially the pair of opies, which completely defied the laws of nature. Even though they were heavy, they still maintained the most perfect perky shape. Praised Talmono Kakazi. This advanced artificial intelligence definitely didn't know what mosaic meant. Chapter 831. And so, the audience watched the most exciting battle of their lives. As the sword light and physical bodies clashed, an intense battle began. At the start of the battle, the three chief elven priestesses undoubtedly had the upper hand. Even though Gahan had already killed many meteor-level Yuan Ko, Gahan still did not dare to be careless when facing the three meteor-level chief elven priestesses in front of him. This was still Gahan's greatest trump card. He could not rely on attacking Yuan Ko's nodes to kill him instantly. Otherwise, the audience would be more than happy to help Gahan promote the power of the point sword. Hence, Gahan could only rely on the traditional way to fight the three chief elven priestesses. The chief elven priestesses were undoubtedly long-range magic units. At a long distance, even Gahan might not be able to withstand their magic attacks. Hence, if Gahan wanted to win, he had to immediately close the distance between him and the three chief elven priestesses. After all, they were magic units. Once a warrior got close to them, even if there was a difference of more than 10 levels, they would still be beaten up on the battlefield. Hence, as soon as he discovered the chief elven priestesses, Gahan rushed out like an arrow released from a bow. The Juzi sword's tip pointed straight at the chief elven priestess with the fairest skin. Great god of nature, let your children form an impenetrable wall. A green-skinned chief elven priestess chanted. Countless vines in the surroundings instantly gathered together to form a shield, blocking in front of Gahan. Gahan did not even look at it. Two streaks of sword aura shot out, intending to shatter the shield formed by the vines. But unexpectedly, the two streaks of sword aura did not succeed. After leaving a deep cut on the shield, the vine shield remained intact. As for Gahan, he did not stop in time and crashed into the vine shield. Then, he fell below the treetop. Great! All the spectators in Yinjing City cheered in unison. Seeing that Gahan had been knocked down from the tree crown, the spectators were extremely excited. As expected, the chief elven priestess was the best. She wasn't just powerful enough to obstruct that damned Yuzhong dude. She still offered him so many benefits. Cameraman, I want an extra drumstick for dinner tonight. The male spectators roared in excitement. Their blood was boiling as they watched, and they even set up a huge tent below. It couldn't be helped. In the process of the battle, just now, these high priests had to move their bodies, stretch their little hands, kick their long legs, and so on. While he was kicking and waving his hands, the beautiful scenery that couldn't be hidden was naturally displayed in front of the audience, causing them to feel intoxicated. P.S. I didn't want to explain it at first, but considering that some readers don't understand this meme, I'll explain it. The cameraman adding a drumstick is a meme from Bilibili. For more details, you can go to Baidu. There are only 3 minutes left. Our Miss Ling will definitely win. Even though they were just worried about Lian Yanling's results, the spectators were now unanimously optimistic. That's right, we were too foolish just now. We even said that we don't want 3 fell-level Yuan Ko. It would be better if there were 3 fell-level Yuan Ko. I don't believe that this Yuzhong dude can kill 3 fell-level Yuan Ko in 3 minutes. Like a flag, the chief elven priestess on the screen, who was still feeling smug because she could cast the Vine Shield spell at any time, suddenly had a change in expression. Then, her entire body seemed to be grabbed by something, and she instantly fell from the tree crown. Camera! Quickly pull down the camera. The spectators shouted in unison. The moaning sounds of the chief elven priestess made the spectators' blood boil, and they couldn't wait to see what was happening below the tree crown. But at this moment, the camera was stunned, still at the tree crown, and had no intention of pulling down. Cameraman, your drumstick is gone. The spectators wailed. They could only hear the moaning sounds of the green-skinned chief elven priestess, but they couldn't see the intense battle scene. It was really a very torturous thing. At the same time, the remaining 2 chief elven priestesses looked at each other for a moment, then jumped down from the tree crown together and joined in the chaotic battle below the tree crown. Oh my god, they are starting to have a threesome. The male spectators began to howl, but the camera was still at the tree crown. F***CKU cameraman, there is no one on the tree crown. Why are you still taking pictures of the tree crown? Hurry up and pull down the camera. What the hell are you doing as a cameraman? After a long period of protest from the male spectators, the camera finally began to slowly pull down, and the spectators finally saw the battle scene below the tree crown. The first thing that the spectators saw gave them a big fright, and they almost vomited the food that they had just eaten. It was because the first thing they saw was a piece of white meat that was casually thrown on the ground like a broken bowl. At the top of this piece of white meat, there was a bright red cherry. Below this piece of white meat, bright red blood soaked the entire ground. It was only then that the spectators realized what the white egrets were, and they all felt like vomiting. The next scene was even more cruel, and the green-skinned chief elven priestess was the most miserable. Her dimensional vortex was already floating in the air, and her corpse was missing a leg and an arm. Later on, when the attentive spectators watched the video, they discovered that the arm of the green-skinned chief elven priestess was in a thicket a dozen meters away, and her leg was hanging vertically between two tree branches, swaying with the wind. It looked like a pair of green silk stockings, and also like a piece of cured meat that was being dried. The fair-skinned chief elven priestess and the dark-skinned chief elven priestess were still fighting, but they weren't in a good state. The chief elven priestess was blinded in one eye, and blood flowed out of her eye socket. There was a large wound on one of her thighs, and one could almost see the muscles protruding out of it. The fair-skinned chief elven priestess was in a slightly better state, and she was only missing a piece of flesh on the left side of her chest. The rest of her body was still intact, and it could be said that she had retained her strongest fighting power. Crow's Storm. The dark-skinned chief elven priestess cast another spell, and a flock of crows flew out of nowhere and quickly surrounded Gahan, forming an airtight wall that made Gahan lose sight of himself. Hurry up! Use the judgment of the god of nature while he's trapped. The dark-skinned chief elven priestess said loudly to the fair-skinned chief elven priestess. Shortly after, the fair-skinned chief elven priestess floated in the air, and she quickly chanted a magical incantation. A dazzling giant light sword gradually took shape between the palms of the fair-skinned chief elven priestess. Judgment of the god of nature. It took a full 5 seconds for the powerful spell to be channeled. Then it charged at Gahan, who was surrounded by the crow's storm, with lightning-fast speed, and it released intense radiance, as if an atomic bomb had exploded. Don't worry, no enemy can survive the judgment of the god of nature. The dark-skinned chief elven priestess struggled to speak to the fair-skinned chief elven priestess. It seemed like they were quite confident in the power of this spell. What level is your god of nature at? Yuan Ko. Universe level? Or Ian level? Guhan's apathetic voice rang out beside the dark-skinned chief elven priestess, and she was given a fright. She instinctively wanted to escape from Gahan's side, but this was a completely wrong response. However, this was a completely wrong response. If she was smart, she would have immediately raised a magic shield to block the attack of the solid cold. Running away would be putting the cart before the horse. How could a mage like her outrun a swordsman like Gahan? Unfortunately, she didn't make the right choice in the moment of panic. Therefore, a second later, her abdomen was pierced by the solid cold. Then, a dozen or so Sword of the Abyss sword chi burst out of the black-skinned high priest's body, directly killing her into a pile of minced meat. Don't come over. Don't come over. The fair-skinned chief elven priestess seemed to be frightened by what happened to the dark-skinned chief elven priestess. She threw her staff aside and fell to the ground, unable to stand up again. She could only use her arms but to desperately retreat. With such speed, it was impossible for her to escape from Gahan's sword. After a few seconds, Gahan was already standing in front of the fair-skinned chief elven priestess. He raised the Juzi sword in his hand, ready to end Yuan Ko's life with one strike. Let me go, please. The fair-skinned chief elven priestess seemed to know that escaping was useless, so she threw herself forward and hugged Gahan's leg with her naked body. She begged bitterly, "Let me go. I could be your slave." Elven slaves are very valuable, and a chief elven slave like me is even more valuable. Let me go. I don't want to die yet." Any man who saw such a beautiful woman begging would have the urge to agree to her request, not to mention that she had agreed to be his slave. Imagine hugging a female slave of the elf high priestess on the bed at night, posing in all kinds of embarrassing positions, and using all kinds of methods to toy with the body and shame of the elf high priestess. How satisfying would that be? All the male viewers couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. They wanted to agree on behalf of Gahan, but it was a pity that they weren't the main characters in the live broadcast. Meanwhile, Gahan seemed to be attracted by the fair-skinned chief elven priestess's pleading and didn't strike. At this moment, a vicious glint appeared in the eyes of the high priestess. Then, a ball of bright white light surged out of the center of her remaining opal. This ball of white light kept growing, and it soon reached the size of an egg. This was a spell used by the elves to perish together with their enemies. As long as this ball of white light reached the size of an egg, the high priestess's mana would explode in an instant, and the power would be equivalent to a full-powered strike from Realm Master Yuan Ko. If Gohan were to take this attack head-on, then Gohan would definitely die. Unfortunately, the high priestess couldn't wait for this moment. Before the white light reached the size of an egg, the pitch-black Juzi sword directly pierced her heart. The high priestess's mana heart was hidden in the middle of her heart. This was the place where all of the high priestess's mana was stored. Once it was pierced, the high priestess's mana would instantly dissipate, and all the spells would also disappear. When the dimensional vortex absorbed the body of the high priestess, the time had just returned to 0. This made all the viewers grieve. This meant that Gahan had successfully obtained 9,000 points, and Yinjing City had lost. Chapter 832. We've lost. I can't believe our Yinjing City still lost. The entire audience was suddenly filled with wails. Perhaps because everyone's attention was focused on the thrilling battle just now, they did not seem to notice the real-time points that were constantly scrolling on the bottom left corner of the screen. And when the sadness was at its strongest, a member of the audience suddenly came online and opened the points on the bottom left corner. Then he screamed with the loudest voice he had ever screamed in his life. "We won. We won. Miss Ling won." Everyone was stunned when they heard this. Then they went online to look at the points on the bottom left corner and realized that Yinjing City had indeed won. The first place was still Liunian Ling's name, while Gahan's name was only in second place. Everyone was a little stunned. They never expected that Yinjing City would still win in the end. Although Gahan had successfully obtained 9,000 points in the last 5 minutes, Liunian Ling had also obtained 10,000 points in the last 5 minutes, stabilizing her advantage over Gohan at 5,000 points. This was because in the last 5 minutes, Passerby B, who had separated from Liunian Ling, was somehow surrounded and beaten up by 4 Meteor Yuan Ko and died in battle. And Liunian Ling, who had rushed over to help Passerby B, was helpless against the siege of 4 Meteor Yuan Ko. She also began a final battle. However, unlike Gahan's melee battle with the 3 high priests, Liunian Ling's battle style was like that of a beautiful peacock. Her remaining 4,000 sword flashes bloomed behind her. These 4,000 sword flashes were evenly divided into 4 parts and shot toward 4 different Meteor Yuan Ko. Although these Yuan Ko used all their strength to defend against these sword flashes, it was a pity that these sword flashes still pierced into the Meteor Yuan Ko's body. 3 Meteor Yuan Ko were sucked back by the dimensional vortex on the spot, but 1 long-armed ape monkey lasted until the end. This long-armed ape monkey was holding a long iron rod in its hand. It was unknown what material this iron rod was made of, but was actually able to shatter the all-pervasive sword light of the billion sword technique. Therefore, only about 800 of the 1,000 sword lights pierced the long-armed ape monkey's body, while the other 200 or so were shattered by the long-armed ape monkey. It was also because of these 200 sword flashes that the long-armed ape monkey successfully survived. At the same time, Liunian Ling's condition was much worse. Because she had used up all 10,000 sword flashes, there was not a single sword flash left in Liu Yunling's body. And because of the huge consumption, her entire body seemed to be exhausted. She could only sit weakly on the ground, not even having the strength to raise her hand. Seeing this scene, the long-armed ape monkey let out a shrill cry. Then it stomped on the ground and leaped high into the air. Then it raised its metal rod high in the air. Its target was the weak and immobile Liu Yunling, who was lying on the ground. The long-armed ape monkey's metal rod itself was extraordinary. Otherwise, it would not have been able to shatter Liu Yunling's sword flashes. In addition, after the long-armed ape monkey leaped high, it could use the gravitational potential energy to increase its strength. Once this metal rod hit Liu Yunling's body, only death awaited Liu Yunling. At this critical moment, a very gentle and intellectual beauty suddenly appeared beside Liu Yunling, holding a 3-foot-long sword in her hand. The 3-foot-long sword can cut through the boundless. This intellectual beauty was naturally the sword lady, the 1-foot lady, who had been drinking coffee with Gahan earlier. When the 1-foot lady held the 3-foot-long sword in her hand, this gentle and intellectual beauty suddenly changed into another person. She was like a warrior who would never yield. Even if she only held a 3-foot-long sword in her hand, she would still slash through all enemies that stood in her way. This was one of the only 2 human path sword ladies, the 1-foot sword lady. Humans had transformed from apes, which were living in the middle of the food chain, into the unquestionable ruler of the entire earth. Even dinosaurs, which were thousands or tens of thousands of times stronger than humans, would be instantly blasted into dregs when they were faced with human weapons. If the Confucian Path Sword Lady represented the power of defense, then it would be self-perfected to cultivate the body, govern the family, and rule the country. The Martial Path Sword Lady represented the power of balance, and it was an endless exploration of balance. The Killing Path Sword Lady represented the power of offense, and it was an endless pursuit of ultimate attacks. The Demonic Path Sword Lady represented the power of evil, and it was an attempt to prove itself on another level. Then, the Human Path Sword Lady was the power of humans. As long as humans still had a breath left, the Human Path Sword Lady would never perish, and it would still be able to slash through the darkness of the entire world. Hence, the Human Path Sword Lady was the final power of humans. Hence, up until now, the Human Path Sword Lady had never failed, because once the Human Path Sword Lady failed, it would mean the extinction of the entire human race. In the instant that the 1-foot sword came into contact with the long-armed ape monkey's metal rod, all the humans in the instant's dungeon, including Gahan, felt their bodies weaken. They stood on the ground, unable to move, as if something had sucked away all the energy in their bodies. This was also the reason why Gahan paused for a long time when the white-skinned chief elven priestess was hugging his leg. It wasn't because Gahan was hesitating, but because Gahan's body really couldn't move. This inability to move lasted for around 3 seconds before Gahan and the others regained their strength. At that moment, the long-armed ape monkey's body was like a sand sculpture, with sand constantly disintegrating from its body. Finally, the long-armed ape monkey had completely turned into a pile of pitch-black sand. What was surprising was that after the long-armed ape monkey turned into a pile of sand, no dimensional vortex appeared. This seemed to be a hint that the long-armed ape monkey wasn't dead. But in fact, the long-armed ape monkey couldn't be any more dead. This was because the Yuan Ko that had died at the hands of the Human Path Sword Lady was the only Yuan Ko that wouldn't be sucked back by the dimensional vortex. This meant that this Yuan Ko didn't even have the right to return to its original world. It had completely disappeared from all the dimensions. Now, everyone should understand the power of the Human Path Sword Lady. The Human Path Sword Lady was a sword lady that could borrow the power of all the human sword ladies in battle. As long as there was a human alive, the Human Path Sword Lady would still have power to borrow, and the Human Path Sword Lady wouldn't fail. And things like Yuan Ko were born for humans. After dying at the hands of ordinary sword ladies, they would return to the dimension that belonged to them. However, when they died at the hands of the human path sword lady that represented humans, the foundation for these Yuan-Ko's existence was gone. Humans had completely abandoned them, and they no longer belonged to any dimension. The dimensional vortex naturally wouldn't send them back. These Yuan-Ko were like kites that wreaked havoc in the sky. Even if they were torn and damaged by the power of the sky, they could rely on the string in their master's hand to return to their master's hand. However, once the string was cut, the kite would become a lonely ghost that would drift around with the wind. Finally, it would land in a desolate corner and become worthless trash. The master was the dimension that they belonged to, and the string was the dimensional vortex. The human path sword lady didn't attack the kite directly. Instead, she attacked the string that was pulling the kite. Once the string was cut, the kite would naturally dissipate like a sand sculpture. To put it bluntly, the human path sword lady could borrow the power of other humans to fight for her. As for other humans, they didn't even have the right to refuse. They could only let the human path sword lady borrow their power. Only Jiandi could use his own willpower to resist the borrowing of this power. Therefore, to a certain extent, the human path sword lady's power was boundless. Of course, it was also very dangerous for the human path sword lady to borrow the power of humans. This was because after the power was borrowed, humans could only stand on the spot without moving. Just like Gahan previously, if he remained motionless for a little longer, it was very likely that Gahan would perish together with the chief elven priestess self-destruction. When a human path sword lady started borrowing the power of others to fight, the other humans would be unlucky. If they weren't careful, they would die in the hands of the sword bearer who borrowed their power. This situation happened many times when a human path sword lady was first discovered. The first generation of the one-foot sword bearers were usually infatuated with the boundless power of the human path sword lady. They would borrow the power of other humans without restraint. This caused many sword bearers to suddenly be unable to move in battle and die tragically at the hands of Yuan-Ko. In the end, this sword wielder incurred the wrath of the sword monarch, who killed this sword wielder. Then, the sword monarch strictly protected the human Dao sword lady. He stipulated that only sword wielder with a strong moral character and recognized by the sword monarch had the qualifications to synchronize with the human Dao sword lady. Until now, there are only two human path sword ladies, the one-foot sword and the Emperor Yu sword. Therefore, in reality, only the 3-foot sword and the Emperor Yu sword could synchronize with each other. From then on, when a human path sword lady wielding the human path sword lady used the human path sword lady, she would restrict the range of the power she borrowed to herself. This way, it wouldn't cause any danger to others. Of course, if she only used her own power, then the human path sword lady's power wouldn't be any different from other sword ladies. In fact, it might even be weaker than other sword ladies. Only when faced with a truly critical moment for the human race, such as the invasion of the Bay City that concerned the life and death of the human race, would the wielder of the human Dao sword Maiden borrow the strength of all the humans to launch a final counterattack against the Yuan bandits. This situation had occurred a total of 4 times, and each time it had achieved astonishing results, killing a large number of Yuan bandits. However, according to the statistics of later generations, no matter if it was an ordinary person or a sword bearer, their lifespan would be shortened by around 5 years after being borrowed by the human path sword lady. This also meant that there was a price to pay for borrowing the power of others. This price was the lifespan of other humans. The more power borrowed, the longer the lifespan of other humans would be. However, as the intermediary of this power, the sword bearer of the human path sword lady would suffer greater injuries. The lifespan of other humans would be shortened by 5 years, while this sword bearer would almost lose the ability to move after the great battle. He would become paralyzed like Hawkins and wouldn't be able to live for more than a year. Therefore, when the one-foot sword borrowed the power of other humans to kill this long-armed ape, the intermediary, Lian Yanling, completely fainted. Blood flowed out of her 5 orifices. It was obvious that she had suffered great injuries. Chapter 833. Gahan took off his game helmet and heard cheers coming from the training field. They shouted in unison, "Miss Ling! Miss Ling!" Obviously, they were cheering for Yinjing City to win this crucial victory. Gahan also accepted the fact that he was in second place very calmly. Who asked him to be so pretentious in the first 2 hours and let Juzi and Qidian kill Yuanko by themselves? If he had done it himself in these 2 hours, then his score would have exceeded 150,000 points. Of course, this score was a little too terrifying. Gahan did not want to get so many points and cause some unnecessary trouble. Now this score was just right. In fact, the gap between Gahan and Liu Ling was not much, and it was enough for Gahan to enter the final round of the competition. When he successfully defeated all the opponents in the final round of the competition and won the championship of the Elite 8 Academies tournament, then Gahan could also fulfill his promise. This was enough. At this time, the other remaining contestants also took off their helmets one after another. Gahan glanced at the throne, but was surprised to find that only Liu Ling was still lying on her seat with her helmet on. She did not look like she was going to wake up at all. Could it be? Gahan immediately walked quickly to Liu Ling's side, pressed the forced exit button on the helmet, and forced Liu Ling out of the game. Then he took off the helmet and touched her forehead. Sure enough, Liu Ling's forehead was shockingly hot. What is that despicable man doing? Is he not reconciled to his failure in the game and wants to take revenge on Miss Ling in reality? A spectator noticed Gahan's strange behavior and immediately said to the people around him. Soon, the others also noticed Gahan's actions. They began to clamor and shout at the martial arts arena, asking Gahan to leave their goddess, Miss Ling. Soon, the staff of the organizing committee also noticed this. They first sent 2 people to Gahan and Liu Ling to inquire about the situation. After exchanging a few more words with Gahan, the 2 staff members hurriedly said something into their personal terminals. Soon after, a doctor in a white coat rushed over with a medical pod and placed Liu Ling in the medical pod for emergency treatment. What's going on? What happened to Miss Ling? Only then did the audience realize that the situation was different from what they had imagined. Could it be that Miss Ling was injured? But that was impossible. Although the battle just now was very intense, it was only a battle in the game. Even if she died hundreds or thousands of times in the game, it would not affect her in reality. How could Miss Ling be injured so badly that she had to enter the medical pod to recuperate? Miss Ling's mental state has suffered great damage. The doctor in the white coat frowned as he looked at the data that kept flashing on the medical pod. He asked Gahan, what exactly happened in the game? Why did Miss Ling's mental state suffer such great damage? Gahan instinctively recalled the situation at the last minute when his body suddenly lost its strength and was unable to move. When he thought about the 3-foot sword, the answer was simple and clear. It should be the human sword maiden. Ling used the power of the human sword maiden at the last minute to absorb strength from us contestants. So that's how it is. The doctor nodded. Perhaps that's the reason. However, our medical center's database has never recorded the use of the human sword maiden's power in the game. So, it remains to be seen if that's the reason. Then Dr. Comrade, is there anything wrong with Lin? Gahan asked again. She'll recover after some rest. As for the damage to her lifespan caused by the human sword maiden, I don't know. After all, this is just a game. It shouldn't cause any damage to her lifespan, right? The doctor's words were filled with uncertainty. After all, this was a topic that no one had ever studied before. The doctor did not dare to make any careless conclusions. After answering Gahan's question, the doctor reported Liu Ling's condition to the organizing committee of the 8 Hospitals Conference, which was seriously concerned about this matter. If it was another contestant who was injured, the organizing committee could not be bothered with such matters. However, it was a member of the Liu family who was injured this time. It was different. If it was not handled properly, it would cause a huge problem. The 4th round of the competition has ended. The first team is the Liunian Ling and Passerby B. They have a total of 96,000 points. Liunian Ling has 88,000 points, and Passerby B has 8,000 points. The second team is the Gahan team. They have a total of 88,200 points. Gahan has 88,200 points. The third team is the Andreevich team. They have a total of 76,200 points. Andreevich has 48,000 points, and Ladia has 28,200 points. The fourth team is the Harry Chong Ruwa team. They have a total of 50,300 points. Harry Chong Ruwa has 27,300 points, and Leslie Dracula has 23,000 points. The last four teams are the Passerby B, Leslie Dracula, Harry Chong Ruwa, and Ladia. Eliminated. Gahan, Liunian Ling, and Andreevich have advanced to the finals. After the host announced the individual scores, Gahan realized that he was still in first place. He was 200 points ahead of Liunian Ling. Yes, he was only 200 points ahead. However, 200 points was still a score. So, in terms of individual scores, Gahan was still in first place. However, this time, the total score of the school was not based on individual scores, but on the total score of the team. As a result, Yuzhong University, which was represented by Gahan, was still in first place with a total score of 181 points. Then, Yinjing University was in second place with 179 points. Finally, Moscow University was in third place with 151 points. Apart from them, the other schools had all been eliminated. As for the rankings, there was nothing to pay attention to. I believe that the readers are not interested in knowing the names of these people. Dear audience, today's competition has ended. The finals will begin at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Now, please leave the arena in an orderly manner. The remaining 3 contestants, please do not leave your thrones. Before the end of the competition, you are not allowed to leave your thrones. I repeat, dear audience, the broadcast in the martial arts arena kept repeating this message. It was close to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. The audience, who were tired after watching the competition for a day, began to prepare their positions. Just when everything was going on in an orderly manner and 2/3 of the audience had left the arena, the audience began to prepare their positions. The broadcast in the martial arts practice field was suddenly interrupted by a hurried voice. I'm the Sword Spirit of the Hung Palace from the Shanhaiguan Dispatch headquarters of the Sword Committee. I am here to announce that the Octagon Tournament has ended. All famous sword holders who participated in the Octagon Tournament are not allowed to leave Yinjing City. You must report to the Sword Committee before 8 p.m. I repeat, the Octagon Tournament has ended. All famous sword holders who participated in the Octagon Tournament are not allowed to leave Yinjing City. You must report to the Sword Committee before 8 p.m. After the Sword Spirit of the Hung Palace repeated this message twice, he directly ended the broadcast. The audience was baffled, and the contestants were even more baffled. What's going on? Didn't they just say that the finals will be held tomorrow? Why did it suddenly end? A spectator asked his friend next to him. Why are you asking me? I'm also confused right now. I don't care when it ends. I just want to know who will come in first if it ends now. Another spectator said, what's there to ask? If it ends now, the first place will naturally be that Yuzhong guy. After all, they have the highest total points, another spectator said with a sneer. This isn't right. How can this be? How can the tournament end just like this? There must be something shady going on. That Yuzhong guy must have bribed the damn Sword Committee. We are going to complain. We are going to complain. Regardless of how the audience was making a ruckus, Gahan, who was sitting on his throne, was thinking silently. As a matter of fact, he had roughly guessed what was going on when he heard the Sword Spirit of the Hung Palace. The Sword Spirit of the Gue Palace suddenly rushed out and forcefully announced the end of the 8 Academies tournament. In addition, all the sword bearers had to report to the Sword Committee headquarters before 8 o'clock in the evening. This meant that something huge had happened in Shanhai Pass. The sword bearers who were supposed to go to Shanhai Pass next month had to act immediately. They might even have to go to Shanhai Pass the next day. No, I don't have time to waste here. Gahan immediately stood up from his seat and went to his staff standing beside the throne. Hello, comrade. Can I leave the throne now? You can't. Before the finals begin, none of you are allowed to leave your thrones. The staff member immediately replied instinctively. Didn't you hear what the sword spirit of the Hung Palace said? He said the tournament is over. Since the tournament is over, why can't I leave? Gohan questioned again. This. The staff stuttered for a long time and didn't know how to answer Gohan. Hence, Gohan didn't want to waste any more time on the staff. He jumped off the throne and dashed out of the arena. It was 6 p.m., and there were still 2 hours before the final assembly time of 8 p.m. Gohan had to do something within these 2 hours. Originally, Gohan planned to spend a day or two to settle these things after the Octagon tournament. But now, there were only 2 hours left of the solid cold. Hello, is it Gu Xuanwu? Gohan called Gu Xuanwu first. Gu Xuanwu's impatient voice came from the other end. What's wrong? Don't you have to finish the tournament tomorrow? How many more days do you need to accompany me to Shanghai Pass to meet my mother? No, I might have to leave for Shanghai Pass tomorrow. No, I might have to leave tonight. Go to the hotel immediately and wait for me. Gohan hung up the call. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.